The scream tore through Betty's diner at exactly 8:43 on a Saturday morning, sharp enough to slice through the clatter of breakfast dishes and the low hum of weekend conversations. Lily Thompson's small body went rigid in the corner booth, her hands flying to the left side of her head, fingers pressing hard against her ear as if she could physically push the pain back inside. Her mouth opened wide, releasing another sound that came from somewhere deep and primal, a place where 8-year-old children shouldn't have to reach. Rachel Morgan's hands froze mid-pour coffee, streaming past the cup's rim and pooling across the counter. She'd been watching the Thompson table from the moment they walked in 20 minutes ago. 6 months of Saturday mornings had taught her the pattern. The father always ordered black coffee and wheat toast. The daughter always pointed to the pancake special on the laminated menu, her small finger tapping twice for emphasis. They always took the corner booth by the window where the morning light fell, just right, where the little girl could see everyone approaching from the front. And every third or fourth visit this happened. Jake Thompson moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd navigated this crisis too many times to count. His leather vest creaked as he slid across the vinyl seat, gathering his daughter against his chest. 240 pounds of muscle and ink-covered skin, president of the Steel Vipers Motorcycle Club, reduced to helpless desperation by the suffering of one small child. His hands moved in quick, deliberate gestures, sign language flowing as naturally as breath. The rough calluses on his palms earned from years of motorcycle mechanics, and darker things formed words of comfort. His daughter couldn't hear but understood through years of silent conversation. Rachel set down the coffee pot with hands that trembled just enough to matter. She'd filled dozens of refills this morning, smiled through small talk with regulars who knew her name, and always left 20%. But her attention had never left that corner booth. The observation she'd been building over 6 months of careful watching suddenly crystallized into certainty that made her chest tight with something between conviction and terror. The pain always came from the left side. Always. Every single episode she'd witnessed, and she'd counted 11, began with Lily's hand reaching for her left ear, her small head tilting at that specific angle, 45 degrees clockwise, as if the shift in position might somehow ease the pressure building behind her eardrum. The right ear never drew her attention, never warranted even a passing touch. Just the left, always the left, with that particular tilt Rachel had watched repeat itself so many times she could now predict it 3 seconds before it happened. Betty Sanders emerged from the kitchen, 70 years of diner wisdom etched into the lines of her face, a dish rag still clutched in flour-dusted hands. She caught Rachel's eye and gave a slight shake of her head. They had had this conversation before, whispered during late-night closing shifts when the last customer had gone, and only the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Betty had served the Thompsons since Lily was 3 years old. She'd watched the little girl master sign language, learn to read lips with uncanny accuracy, navigate a hearing world with grace that broke your heart if you paid attention. She'd also watched Rachel watch them, had seen the waitress taking mental notes with an intensity that suggested something more than casual interest. The other patrons tried not to stare. The morning crowd at Betty's knew the unspoken rule: Jake Thompson commanded a certain respect in this part of Austin. The Steel Vipers owned 3 blocks of South Congress, ran legitimate businesses that kept the neighborhood safe, and didn't tolerate disrespect toward their president or his family. But respect didn't mean indifference. Rachel could see the concern in the sideways glances, the way conversations dropped to murmurs, how old man Jenkins at the counter gripped his mug tighter while pretending to study the laminated menu he'd memorized 20 years ago. Lily's trembling began to subside after 90 seconds, the same duration as always. Rachel had timed it once with her phone, felt sick doing it, but the data mattered. 90 seconds of acute distress followed by 20 to 30 minutes of lingering discomfort, then gradual return to baseline. The pattern held with mathematical precision that suggested a physical cause, something structural, something that shouldn't exist in the vague diagnosis every doctor had apparently settled on. Jake's hands continued their fluid conversation, and even from 15 feet away, Rachel could read the desperate reassurance in his movements. She taught herself basic sign language using free YouTube tutorials during slow Tuesday shifts, had practiced fingerspelling customer names until her hands ached, all because she needed to understand what passed between father and daughter when these episodes struck. The memory of Jake's face from 4 months ago surfaced unbidden. She'd been wiping down tables near closing time when she'd overheard him on his phone in the parking lot, his back to the window, shoulders curved in a posture of defeat she'd never seen him display inside the diner. His voice had carried through the spring night, rough with suppressed emotion, talking to someone about another specialist appointment, another $3,000 consultation that had yielded the same conclusion as the previous 22. Profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, cause unknown, prognosis unchangeable. Rachel had stood there with a damp cloth in her hand, watching through the window as Jake Thompson, man who'd stared down rival club presidents, who'd built a reputation for never backing down from anything, pressed his forehead against his motorcycle's handlebars and wept. That image had haunted her for weeks. Still did. Some things you couldn't unsee, couldn't unknow. The humanity underneath the leather and ink, the father beneath the president, the man who'd spent 8 years and a fortune trying to give his daughter what every specialist insisted was impossible. Lily's crying softened into hiccuping breaths. Her small hand remained pressed against her left ear, and Rachel noted the gesture, again filed it away with all the other observations that had accumulated in her mental catalog. The tilt of the head, the specific location, the duration, the frequency increasing over the past 2 months, episodes coming closer together. Wednesday afternoon, Saturday morning, Tuesday evening. No pattern to the timing, but absolute consistency in the presentation. 3 weeks ago, Rachel had spent 6 hours of her day off in the Austin Public Library's medical section, scrolling through archived journals on a computer terminal that smelled like old books and desperation. She'd typed search terms with increasing specificity: pediatric hearing loss, foreign body impaction, undiagnosed ear pain, conductive hearing loss misdiagnosed as sensorineural. The rabbit hole had taken her deep into case studies and research papers, written in language that required 3 browser tabs of medical dictionaries to decode. One article had stopped her cold. A case study from Johns Hopkins published 18 months ago. A 6-year-old boy with diagnosed bilateral sensorineural hearing loss who'd been deaf for 4 years. Expensive hearing aids, sign language fluency, resigned acceptance from parents who'd exhausted every option. Until an observant grandmother noticed the child always favored one side, always tilted his head the same way. Until someone finally looked with the right angle of light and found a foam bead lodged deep, camouflaged by years of accumulated wax, pressing against the eardrum and blocking sound transmission so completely that every standard examination had missed it. Removal had been delicate, risky, performed by a specialist under sedation. The boy had walked out of the hospital hearing perfectly from that ear. 4 years of silence erased in 15 minutes because someone had noticed a pattern and refused to accept unexplained as a final answer. Rachel had printed the article with shaking hands, folded it into her apron pocket, where it had lived ever since growing soft from repeated handling, the text fading from her nervous fingers, tracing over the words late at night when sleep wouldn't come. But knowledge and action sat miles apart, separated by a chasm of fear Rachel had been unable to cross. Until now, until she'd watched Lily Thompson's face contort in pain, for the 11th time watched Jake's weathered hands sign words of comfort he couldn't make true, watched the same helpless cycle repeat itself while she stood behind a counter, with coffee going cold in her hands and information in her pocket that might matter, or might be the desperate overreach of a waitress playing doctor. The real barrier, one Rachel couldn't quite admit, even to herself during those late-night hours of wavering conviction, wasn't about medical credentials or legal liability. It was about Danny. About the night 3 years ago when her 13-year-old brother had complained of stomach pain, and Rachel, armed with 2 years of nursing school and dangerous amounts of confidence, had diagnosed a common stomach bug, had told their mother not to worry, had assured Danny it would pass. The appendix had ruptured 12 hours later. Emergency surgery, 3 weeks in the hospital, sepsis that nearly killed him. And Rachel standing in the ICU hallway at 2 in the morning, watching through the window as machines breathed for her brother, learning the hard lesson that good intentions meant nothing when you were wrong, that conviction without expertise could destroy the people you loved most. She dropped out of nursing school the next semester. The instructors had encouraged her to return, told her she had talent, reminded her that doctors made mistakes too, that this was part of learning. But Rachel couldn't forget her mother's face in that hospital hallway, the way she'd looked at her daughter with something beyond disappointment, something closer to betrayal. She'd trusted Rachel's judgment. Danny had trusted his sister, and Rachel had almost killed him through sheer arrogance. The coffee had stopped steaming in the pot. Rachel wiped down the counter with mechanical precision, her eyes still tracking the corner booth, where Lily was finally sitting up, her face blotchy from tears, her small fingers still resting against her left ear. Jake was signing something that made his daughter nod, probably asking if she wanted to leave to go home, where the familiar silence surrounded her like armor against a world too loud and too painful. Betty appeared at Rachel's elbow with the kind of timing that suggested she'd been waiting for this exact moment. The older woman's voice stayed low, meant only for Rachel's ears. "You've been watching them for months. I know that look. That's not curiosity. That's something you think you know." Rachel's grip tightened on the coffee pot. "I don't know anything. I'm a waitress." Betty's weathered hand covered Rachel's, stilling the compulsive wiping motion that had scrubbed the same section of counter for 90 seconds. "You were almost a nurse. You got further than most people trying to help someone. And you've been carrying that article in your apron so long, the paper's about to disintegrate. Either throw it away or use it, but stop torturing yourself with the middle ground." The words landed with surgical precision because Betty had a gift for that, for seeing through the defenses people built and speaking directly to the truth underneath. Rachel had told her about Danny one night after closing 3 whiskeys deep into a bottle Betty kept under the counter for emergencies. Had confessed the guilt that woke her at 3 in the morning, the certainty that she'd forfeited any right to trust her own judgment about medical matters, that she was dangerous with just enough knowledge to hurt people and not enough to help them. Betty had listened without interruption, had poured another whiskey, and then delivered her verdict. "The only thing more dangerous than knowing a little is refusing to use what you know when someone's suffering in front of you." Jake was helping Lily stand now, his large hand gentle on her back, guiding her from the booth with protective care that made Rachel's chest ache. In another minute, they'd be gone. Another Saturday morning would end with that little girl in pain and her father helpless to prevent it. And Rachel would go back to refilling coffee and pretending she hadn't noticed patterns that medical degrees had somehow missed. Danny's face surfaced in her memory, pale against hospital sheets, tubes running from his arms, monitors beeping their steady warning that his body was fighting an infection that shouldn't have progressed so far. Her mother's voice hollow with exhausted fear. "How could you be so sure? How could you tell me not to worry?" But there was another memory, one Rachel had tried to ignore because it complicated the narrative she'd built around her own failure. 2 weeks after Danny came home from the hospital, still weak but recovering, he'd found her crying in the garage surrounded by discarded nursing textbooks. He'd sat down beside her skinny 13-year-old frame, still fragile from the ordeal, and said something she'd never forgotten. "You made a mistake because you cared. That's different from not caring at all. Don't stop caring because you're scared of being wrong again." Lily and Jake were halfway to the door now. In 10 seconds, they'd be out and in the parking lot, climbing onto Jake's Harley, the little girl's arms wrapped tight around her father's waist as they rode home to familiar silence and unending pain. In 10 seconds, Rachel could let them go, could maintain her safe distance, her waitress neutrality, her carefully constructed buffer between knowledge and action. The decision moved through her like electricity, shorting out every logical objection, bypassing 3 years of self-imposed caution. Her feet carried her from behind the counter before conscious thought caught up with motion. The article in her apron pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds. Her heart slammed against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to return to safety, to remember what happened the last time she'd trusted her observations against better judgment. But Lily Thompson's pain-twisted face overrode every warning. The pattern was too consistent, too specific, too perfectly aligned with that case study from Johns Hopkins. And if Rachel was wrong, she'd survived the embarrassment. She'd survived worse. But if she was right, if she stayed silent, she'd be choosing cowardice over conviction, choosing her own comfort over a child's suffering. That wasn't survivable. Not the kind of survival that let you meet your own eyes in the mirror. Jake had his hand on the door, Lily tucked against his side, when Rachel's voice cut through the diner's ambient noise. The words came out steadier than she felt. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you about Lily's pain." Jake turned slowly. The president of the Steel Vipers Motorcycle Club didn't do quick movements, didn't show surprise, easily had trained himself to react with measured deliberation to everything from business negotiations to direct threats. But something in Rachel's tone made him pause, hand still resting on the door handle, his body positioned protectively between his daughter and whatever this interruption might bring. His voice carried the practiced neutrality of a man who'd learned to assess situations before committing to responses. "We appreciate your concern, Rachel, but we've got this handled." Rachel closed the distance between them, very aware that every eye in the diner was now locked on this interaction, that she was crossing professional boundaries that couldn't be uncrossed, that this moment would define something she couldn't yet name. She positioned herself where Lily could see her face clearly, where the little girl could read her lips if she chose to pay attention. The next words required every ounce of courage Rachel possessed, every lesson learned from watching Danny's chest rise and fall, with mechanical assistance, every moment of 3 years spent running from her own judgment. "I've been watching Lily's episodes for 6 months, timing them, mapping them, and there's something the doctors might have missed." Jake's expression shifted from neutral to guarded. "You're a waitress. No offense." None taken sat on Rachel's tongue, but she swallowed it because that automatic response would diffuse the tension she needed to maintain. "I'm a waitress with 2 years of nursing school and a brother who almost died because doctors missed something obvious. I know what it looks like when the pattern's right there and everyone's looking at the wrong thing." Betty had materialized behind the counter, her presence a silent anchor of support. The morning regulars had stopped pretending not to listen. Old man Jenkins had abandoned his coffee, entirely attention fixed on the scene unfolding near the door. The weight of observation pressed down from all directions, but Rachel kept her focus locked on Jake's face, watching him process this unexpected interruption from someone who'd only ever brought him coffee and taken his order. Jake's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the beard that covered most of his face. 23 specialists have examined my daughter, 23 doctors with fancy degrees from fancy schools. You think they've all missed something?" The question hung there heavy with challenge and desperate hope warring beneath the surface. Rachel recognized that particular cocktail of emotions because she'd felt it herself in that hospital hallway, that terrible space between wanting to believe and being too afraid to let yourself hope. She pulled the folded article from her apron pocket. The paper had gone soft from handling edges fraying, but the text remained legible. "Johns Hopkins. Case study published 18 months ago. 4-year-old boy with bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. 4 years of silence. Until someone noticed he always favored one side. Always tilted his head the same specific way." Rachel held the article out, watching Jake's eyes track from her face to the paper and back again. "Lily's pain always comes from her left ear. Always that specific tilt of her head. I've counted 11 episodes over 6 months, and the pattern never varies. That's not random. That's not unexplained. That's something physical, something localized, something that could be blocking sound transmission and causing pressure against her eardrum." Jake didn't take the article. His hand remained on the door, but his body had shifted slightly, attention fully engaged now rather than dismissive. "You're saying you think there's something lodged in her ear?" Rachel nodded, the motion small and precise. "I think there's a foreign object deep in her left ear canal. Something that's been there for years, covered in accumulated wax, positioned in a way that standard examinations might miss because they are not looking at the right angle with the right light. Something that could explain both the pain and the hearing loss in that ear." The silence stretched long enough for Rachel to question everything, long enough to wonder if she'd just destroyed the only job she had and any credibility she'd built in this community over 3 years of reliable service. Long enough to remember Danny's face and hear her mother's voice and feel the weight of being wrong about things that mattered. Lily had been watching Rachel's lips during this entire exchange, reading the conversation with the sharp attention of someone who'd learned to extract meaning from visual cues alone. Her small hand tugged on her father's vest, a gesture Rachel had seen before when the little girl wanted his attention. Jake looked down, and Lily's hands moved in quick, fluid sign language that Rachel couldn't follow entirely but understood the general plea behind the urgency. Jake's face softened instantly, the defensive posture melting into something more vulnerable. He turned back to Rachel with an expression that had aged 20 years in 30 seconds. "She says the pain is really bad today. Worse than usual. That she wants you to look." The trust implicit in that statement nearly buckled Rachel's knees. An 8-year-old child who'd spent her entire conscious life in silence, who'd endured countless medical examinations and procedures, was asking to let a waitress examine her based on nothing but overheard conversation and desperate hope. Rachel met Lily's eyes directly, saw the intelligence and pain and courage looking back at her, and made a silent promise that this trust wouldn't be betrayed. Not like Danny, not like the last time Rachel had been so certain she was right. Jake seemed to come to some internal decision, the kind that rippled through his entire frame like a physical shift. What exactly are you proposing? Because I need to be clear, if you're wrong about this, if you hurt my daughter, or give her false hope that destroys her when it crashes, you and I are going to have a serious problem. The kind of problem that doesn't get solved with apologies. The threat landed without malice, just statement of fact from a father who'd already exhausted hope too many times to let it poison his daughter again. Rachel understood the weight behind those words, respected them, even because they came from the same place as her own caution, the same knowledge that good intentions could cause profound harm. She pulled out her phone, opened the flashlight app with fingers that only trembled slightly. I want to examine her ear with proper light and angle, that's all. Just look. If I'm wrong, I'll never speak of this again. If I'm right, if there's something there, we'll need to make decisions about extraction. But first, we need to know if my observation has any basis in reality. Betty's voice cut in from behind the counter, addressing Jake directly with the authority of someone who'd known him since before the Steel Vipers existed, since he was just another kid from the neighborhood trying to find his way. Jake Thompson, I've watched Rachel notice things about my customers that I've missed after 40 years in this business. She knew Mrs. Patterson had diabetes before Mrs. Patterson did spotted it from the way she was eating her pie. She caught that Jenkins was having eye trouble 6 months before his optometrist diagnosed cataracts. The girl pays attention. That counts for something. Jake's eyes moved between Betty, Rachel, and his daughter, weighing variables Rachel couldn't guess at, calculating risks that probably exceeded her understanding of what this moment actually meant for him. The Steel Vipers president, the father, the man who'd spent 8 years and a fortune chasing impossible cures, standing in a diner doorway, trying to decide whether to trust a waitress with his daughter's well-being. Lily's hand tugged on his vest again, more insistent this time, and her fingers moved in sign language that even Rachel could read. Please. Something broke in Jake's face, some final wall of resistance, crumbling under the accumulated weight of his daughter's suffering and the faint, desperate possibility that this stranger might see what expensive experts had missed. He nodded once, sharp and decisive, the motion of a man committing fully once the decision was made. His voice came out rough, scraped, raw by emotion he was barely containing. Okay, we do this. But Rachel, I'm trusting you with the most important thing in my world. Don't make me regret it. Rachel nodded, throat too tight for words, and gestured back toward the corner booth they'd just left. Betty was already moving, flipping the open sign to closed, and pulling the blinds on the front windows, creating privacy in a space that had never been private before. The other patrons filed out quietly, Old Man Jenkins pressing a 20 into Betty's hand and squeezing her shoulder in a gesture of support that needed no words. Within 3 minutes, the diner held only 4 people, Betty, Jake, Lily, and Rachel. The morning sun, streaming through gaps in the blinds, painted stripes across the linoleum floor. The coffee maker gurgled its last cycle, then fell silent. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed its eternal note. Rachel guided Lily back to the corner booth, her movements careful and deliberate, making sure the little girl could see everything she was doing. She activated her phone's flashlight and knelt beside the booth, bringing herself to eye level with her patient. Because that's what Lily had become in the span of 5 minutes. Not a customer's daughter, not a regular, but someone who'd placed trust in Rachel's observations and was waiting to see if that trust had been earned. Betty appeared with rubbing alcohol and clean towels. Practical woman preparing for whatever came next. Jake positioned himself directly opposite Rachel, close enough to intervene instantly, if needed, his entire body coiled with tension that made the air feel dense. Rachel took a breath that filled her lungs completely, held it for 3 counts, released it slowly. The technique she'd learned in nursing school for steadying hands before procedures, for clearing panic that could cause mistakes. Danny's face flashed through her mind, but she pushed it aside. This wasn't about her fear. This was about a little girl who'd spent 8 years in pain and silence because nobody had looked at the right angle. She leaned in slowly, giving Lily time to adjust, to pull away if she wanted. The little girl stayed perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on Rachel's face with absolute trust that felt like physical weight. The first examination revealed nothing unusual. Standard ear canal, healthy pink tissue, natural shadows and curves. Rachel adjusted her angle slightly, tilted the phone's light, tried different approaches. Still nothing. The familiar panic began creeping up her spine, the certainty that she'd been wrong, that this was Danny all over again, that she'd let conviction override reality and was about to humiliate herself and devastate this family with false hope. Then she remembered Lily's head tilt, that specific 45-degree angle clockwise that the little girl maintained during her pain episodes. Rachel shifted her own head to match that exact position, adjusted the light to follow the line of sight that angle created, and suddenly the beam caught something different. Deep in the ear canal, nearly at the eardrum, was a mass. Not wax, not entirely. The texture was wrong, the color slightly off, darker than natural buildup should be. Something foreign wrapped in layers of accumulated debris, compressed against delicate tissue, blocking sound transmission, and causing pressure that probably spiked with changes in altitude or temperature, or a dozen other variables Rachel couldn't identify. Her breath caught audibly. Jake's hand immediately gripped the edge of the table, every muscle in his frame tensing for action. Rachel pulled back slightly, her heart hammering so hard she could feel the pulse in her throat. The words came out barely above a whisper, shaky with adrenaline and vindication and terror at being right. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to look at this. I need confirmation I'm not seeing what I want to see." She handed him the phone, positioned his head at the exact angle she'd discovered, guided the light to hit precisely right. Jake looked, his breath going still, his weathered face draining of color as he saw what Rachel had found, what 23 specialists had apparently missed, what had been causing his daughter pain in silence for years. When he pulled back, his voice came out destroyed. "What is that?" Rachel's nursing school training kicked in the clinical assessment she'd been taught to deliver calmly and clearly. "I think it's a foreign object, probably inserted when Lily was very young, too young to remember. It's been there for years, accumulating wax around it, getting compressed deeper as her ear canal grew. It's positioned against her eardrum, blocking sound transmission and causing pain when pressure builds. That's why standard examinations missed it. It's deep, it's camouflaged, and it requires this exact angle of light to see clearly." Jake's hand was shaking now, trembling against the table in a way Rachel suspected this man rarely allowed himself to show. Every doctor looked. Every single one. How the fuck did they all miss this? The anger in his voice wasn't directed at Rachel. She understood that. It was the rage of a father who'd spent 8 years watching his daughter suffer, who'd paid small fortunes to people who should have caught at this, who'd been told over and over that nothing could be done when something had been there all along, lodged in plain sight if anyone had just looked at the right angle. Betty's hand landed on Jake's shoulder, grounding him before the fury could spiral. Rachel kept her attention on Lily, on the little girl who'd been watching this exchange with increasing awareness that something important was happening, that the adults around her had discovered something. Jake's hands moved in sign language, explaining to his daughter what Rachel had found. Lily's eyes went wide, her small hand instinctively reaching for her left ear, fingers hovering without touching, as if suddenly aware that something alien had been living there all along. When Jake looked back at Rachel, his face had transformed from anger to something more complex, more dangerous. Hope mixed with terror, the deadly combination that came when you'd been beaten down enough times that wanting something good felt like tempting fate. His voice came out rough, loaded with the weight of 8 years of disappointment and desperate need. "Can you remove it?" And there it was, the question Rachel had been dreading since she'd decided to approach them. The moment where observation became action, where identifying a problem meant she had to either attempt a solution or admit her limitations. The choice Danny's emergency had taught her to fear the leap from knowledge to intervention that carried consequences she'd lived with every day for 3 years. Rachel met Jake's eyes, directly refusing to let him see the panic churning beneath her surface calm. "I believe I can, but Mr. Thompson, this is delicate. If I push it deeper, if I damage the eardrum, I could make things worse. We should really get her to an ENT specialist right now." Jake's response came fast and flat, no room for negotiation. "No, Sarah has episodes like this all the time. The pain subsides after an hour or two. By the time we get to a specialist, make an appointment, actually get seen, it'll be days. And you said it yourself, they've all missed it. Every single one. But my daughter has lived in pain and silence for 8 years because trained professionals with fancy equipment missed what a waitress spotted in 5 minutes with a phone flashlight. He leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them with intensity that made Rachel's breath catch. If you think you can help her, if you believe you can do this safely, then I'm asking you to try one. I'm asking you to help my little girl, please. The please broke something in Rachel's chest, that single word carrying 8 years of accumulated desperation stripped of pride or pretense. Just a father begging someone to ease his daughter's suffering. She looked at Lily, who'd been reading lips through this entire exchange, who understood that this stranger was offering something nobody else had, who nodded once with grave 8-year-old solemnity that made her seem decades older than her years. Betty was already moving, pulling supplies from under the counter with efficiency that suggested she'd been preparing for exactly this moment. Medical tweezers with rubber tips sanitized and ready, clean towels, rubbing alcohol, a first aid kit that looked more comprehensive than any diner should need, probably stocked by Betty's own paranoid preparedness over 40 years of witnessing every kind of minor emergency. Rachel's hands steadied as she organized the supplies, the familiar rhythm of preparation overriding panic. This was nursing school practical training, the hundreds of hours learning sterile technique and gentle manipulation. This was the muscle memory that survived even when confidence failed, that operated beneath conscious thought when conscious thought would paralyze. She met Jake's eyes one last time before beginning, needing him to understand the full weight of what was about to happen. I need you to keep Lily perfectly still. Any movement, any flinch, and I have to stop immediately. This cannot be rushed. Jake nodded, already positioning his daughter with gentle care, laying her on her right side along the booth's bench, her left ear facing upward toward the light. His large hands bracketed her small shoulders, steady and sure, the same hands that probably handled weapons and machinery and violence, maintaining perfect, delicate control. Lily's eyes found Rachel's face, dark and trusting and brave in a way that made Rachel's throat close with emotion she couldn't afford right now. The little girl's fingers spelled out one word in sign language that Rachel had learned specifically for this family: ready. Rachel picked up the tweezers, tested their grip, adjusted the angle of light Betty was holding with steady hands. Every lesson from nursing school filtered through her unaided, and every warning about ear canal procedures, every memorized detail about the delicate structure of the human ear and how easily it could be damaged. And behind it all, Danny's face, the hospital room, the machines, her mother's devastated expression. The knowledge that certainty meant nothing if you were wrong, that conviction could kill, that the distance between helping and hurting was measured in millimeters and mistakes. But Lily was watching her with eyes that said she believed Rachel could do this. Jake was trusting her with everything that mattered in his world. And the pattern had been too consistent, too specific, too perfectly aligned with documented cases to be coincidence. Sometimes you had to trust your observations, even when trusting yourself felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. Rachel inserted the tweezers, slowly following the ear canal's natural curve, moving millimeter by careful millimeter toward the mass she'd identified. The world narrowed to the small circle of light, the foreign object wedged deep, the trembling in her hands that she forced into stillness through sheer will. This was the moment where everything changed, where the waitress became something else, where observation demanded action, where 8 years of silence might end, or Rachel's worst fears about her own judgment might be confirmed. The tweezers made contact with the mass, and Rachel began the most terrifying work of her life. The foreign object resisted contact, compressed by years of accumulated wax into something harder than Rachel had anticipated. The tweezers' rubber tips found purchase on the edge of the mass, but the angle was wrong, the grip too shallow. She applied the gentlest pressure, testing resistance, feeling forgive, that would indicate safe extraction. Lily's body remained absolutely still beneath Jake's steadying hands. The little girl had locked every muscle, 8 years old, and demonstrating control that most adults couldn't maintain. Her breathing came in shallow, measured increments, her eyes fixed on some point beyond Rachel's shoulder, where Betty stood holding the light with unwavering precision. Rachel adjusted the tweezers, fractionally seeking better leverage. The ear canal's natural curve complicated access, requiring her to work at an angle that strained her wrist. Sweat beaded along her hairline despite the diner's air conditioning. The world had compressed to this tiny space, the circle of light, The dark mass, the millimeter by millimeter progression that felt simultaneously too fast and impossibly slow. The mass shifted slightly under pressure. Rachel's breath caught. This was good. This meant the object wasn't embedded in tissue, wasn't attached to anything that would tear during removal. She increased pressure, infinitesimally working the tweezers deeper to find a more secure grip. Then Lily's body jerked. The spasm came without warning, involuntary and violent pain, overriding the little girl's determination to remain motionless. Her head twisted sharply to the left, away from the pressure Rachel had been applying, and the foreign object, momentarily dislodged by the tweezer's contact, shifted deeper into the ear canal, sliding past the point where Rachel could see it clearly disappearing toward the eardrum with sickening finality. Rachel yanked the tweezers out immediately, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard it hurt. The movement had taken maybe half a second, but the damage was done. She'd pushed the obstruction deeper instead of extracting it. She'd made everything worse. Jake's hands tightened on Lily's shoulders, his face draining of color, as he watched his daughter's expression twist with intensified pain. The little girl's mouth opened in a cry that came out broken and desperate, her small hands flying to her left ear, pressing hard as if she could somehow reach inside and fix what Rachel had destroyed. Betty's grip on the phone wavered, the light beam jumping across the booth before she steadied it again. Her voice came out tight. "Rachel, what just happened?" Rachel couldn't answer immediately. Her throat had closed around words that wouldn't form, her mind screaming recriminations that drowned out everything else. Danny's face superimposed itself over Lily's hospital machines, replaced the diner's ambient noise, and the crushing certainty of having been catastrophically wrong settled over her like physical weight. Jake's voice cut through the panic-controlled, but carrying an edge that promised violence if the wrong words came next. "Rachel, tell me what happened. Right now." She forced herself to meet his eyes, forced herself to speak past the terror clogging her airways. She moved. The pain made her jerk away, and the object slid deeper. "I lost visual contact with it, and it's pushed further in than it was before." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but stretched into eternity. Jake's face transformed through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, fury, fear, and something darker that Rachel recognized as the specific rage that came when someone hurt your child intentionally or otherwise. His entire body coiled with tension that suggested imminent explosion. Betty moved first, her weathered hand landing on Jake's arm with surprising strength. "Don't. Not yet. Let's assess the damage before we assign blame." But Jake wasn't looking at Betty. His attention had locked onto Rachel with laser focus, and she could see the president of the Steel Vipers beneath the father's desperation, the man who'd built a reputation on never tolerating threats to his family. His voice came out deadly quiet, the kind of soft that preceded violence in people who knew how to inflict it efficiently. "You said you could do this safely. You said if you were wrong, we'd know. You didn't mention the possibility of making it worse." Rachel's hands were shaking now, trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to stop the visible betrayal of her complete loss of control. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape this moment, to disappear before Jake's carefully maintained composure shattered completely. But Lily was crying, real tears streaming down her face as she pressed against her ear, and running would mean abandoning the little girl to pain Rachel had intensified. The front door of the diner crashed open with enough force to rattle the blinds. A man's voice, rough and suspicious, carried across the space. "Jake, what the hell's going on? Why's the diner closed?" Hank Morrison stepped through the doorway, second in command of the Steel Vipers, 6 feet of muscle and suspicion wrapped in leather and ink. He took in the scene with the quick assessment of someone trained to identify threats. Lily crying Jake's coiled fury, Rachel's obvious distress, Betty's tense positioning between them. His expression hardened immediately. "Someone want to tell me why the president's daughter is in pain, and this waitress looks guilty as hell?" Jake's jaw clenched so hard Rachel could hear his teeth grinding. He didn't turn toward Hank, keeping his attention fixed on Rachel as he spoke. Rachel had a theory about Lily's hearing loss. Thought there was something lodged in her ear. "I let her look. She tried to remove it, and she just pushed it deeper instead." Hank's response came fast and furious, crossing the diner floor with purpose that made Rachel's instincts scream danger. "You let a fucking waitress perform medical procedures on your daughter. Have you lost your goddamn mind?" Betty moved to intercept him, small woman placing herself in front of someone twice her size with complete fearlessness. Back down, Hank, this isn't helping. But Hank wasn't interested in de-escalation. His attention had shifted to Rachel and anger radiating from him in waves she could feel from 6 feet away. You've been serving us coffee for 3 years and now you're playing doctor. Do you have any idea what happens when you fuck with the Steel Vipers family? The threat hung explicit and ugly in the air. Rachel had watched enough interactions between Jake and his club members to understand the hierarchy, to know that Hank's protective instincts ran deep and his willingness to act on them ran deeper. She'd seen him physically remove a drunk customer who'd gotten too loud near Lily, once had watched him clear a path through crowds so the little girl wouldn't get jostled, had heard him on the phone threatening legal action against a school that had failed to provide proper accommodation. He was dangerous in the way men who'd survived violence became dangerous, and right now, all that focused threat was directed at her. Jake's hand shot up a gesture that stopped Hank mid-advance. The authority in that simple movement was absolute president commanding a subordinate leader, asserting control over a situation rapidly spiraling towards something none of them could walk back from. Jake's voice carried weight that made the air feel heavy. Stand down. I made the call to let her try. This is on me. Hank's expression suggested he had plenty more to say, but discipline won out over anger. He stepped back fractionlessly, hands curled into fists, body still radiating barely controlled aggression. Fine, but we're taking Lily to the ER right now. Let actual doctors fix whatever damage got done. Lily's hands had been moving during this exchange, signing something urgent and repetitive that Jake finally registered. He looked down at his daughter, his face softening immediately despite the fury still evident in his clenched jaw. When he looked back up, his expression had shifted into something more complex. His voice came out rough. She says the pain is different now. Not worse, just different. She says, he paused, translating the sign language his daughter continued to form. She says it feels like something's moving, like there's pressure releasing instead of building. Rachel's head snapped up, medical training, overriding panic for one crucial moment. That could mean the object shifted position when it moved deeper. If it was pressing directly against the eardrum before and now it's at a slightly different angle, the pressure distribution would change. It might actually be better positioned for extraction now, even though it's deeper. Hank's laugh came out harsh and disbelieving. You're seriously suggesting we let her try again? After she just made it worse? Betty's voice cut through with unexpected force, decades of diner wisdom translated into authority that somehow matched Hank's aggression. I'm suggesting we listen to the child. Lily's lived with this pain for 8 years. She knows what's different and what's the same, and she's saying it's different. Jake was watching his daughter with the intense focus of someone reading meaning and gestures everyone else would miss. Lily's hands moved again, slower this time, deliberate. Her face had shifted from acute pain to something closer to discomfort, still present, but no longer overwhelming. Her fingers spelled out words Rachel had learned, try again. The trust implicit in that request shattered something in Rachel's chest. This little girl who'd just experienced increased pain from Rachel's failed attempt was asking for another chance, was demonstrating more courage and faith than Rachel possessed in her own abilities, more willingness to risk further hurt in pursuit of healing than Rachel had shown in 3 years of hiding behind a coffee pot. Jake's internal war played out across his face, father wanting to protect versus father wanting to believe this might actually work. He looked at Hank, then Betty, then finally back to Rachel. If we do this, if I let you try again, you need to be straight with me. What are the actual risks? Not best case scenario, not what you hope will happen. What's the worst outcome if this goes wrong? Rachel forced herself to think clinically, to push past panic and assess realistically. Worst case, I perforate the eardrum. That causes pain, bleeding, temporary hearing loss that could become permanent. It would require surgical repair, or I could push the object so deep it becomes embedded in tissue requiring extraction under sedation by a specialist, or I could cause infection that leads to chronic complications. She met Jake's eyes directly, refusing to soften the truth. Those are the risks, real and serious. But Mr. Thompson, that object has been lodged in Lily's ear for probably 8 years. It's already caused damage we can't quantify until it's out. Waiting for an appointment means days of continued pain and risk that it shifts position on its own into something even worse. And based on the fact that 23 specialists miss this, I'm not confident they'll know what they're looking at even when you get her there. Hank made a sound of disgust. This is insane. Jake, you can't seriously be considering... Jake's hand went up again, silencing his second in command. His attention stayed locked on Rachel, assessing her with an intensity that felt like physical examination. You're scared. I can see it. You're terrified you're going to hurt her again. Rachel nodded, throat too tight for words. Jake's voice dropped lower, meant only for her. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. Fear means you will be careful. I trust scared and careful more than I trust confident and reckless. He paused, something shifting in his expression. You want to know why I'm willing to let you try again when every logical bone in my body says I should throw you out and take my daughter to the hospital? Rachel waited, unable to predict what would come next. Jake's weathered hand signed something to Lily, received her nod of confirmation, then looked back at Rachel. Because 7 years ago I made a mistake that put my best friend in the ICU for 3 weeks. Took a corner too fast on a group ride, lost control, caused a pileup that broke Marcus's spine in 2 places. Doctors said he'd never walk again. Said I should accept it and move on. He shifted slightly, his voice carrying weight accumulated from years of carrying guilt. But I couldn't accept it. Couldn't just walk away from damage I'd caused. So I researched, found an experimental procedure, convinced Marcus to try something that could either fix him or leave him paralyzed for life. Everyone told me I was crazy, that I was letting guilt override sense, that I should leave it to the experts who'd already decided his fate. Jake's eyes bored into Rachel's. Marcus walked out of that hospital 6 months later. Rides with the club to this day. Because I was too fucking stubborn to accept that the first answer was the only answer. And because he trusted me even when I'd already hurt him once. The parallel hung between them, obvious and deliberate. Rachel understood what Jake was offering: absolution for the failure, permission to try again, despite the risk, the acknowledgement that mistakes didn't disqualify you from attempting repair, if you were willing to carry the weight of potential consequences. But it was Lily who broke the moment, her small hand reaching out to touch Rachel's arm. The little girl's fingers moved in sign language that Rachel had practiced enough to understand. I'm not scared of you. The statement carried more power than any adult reassurance could have managed. An 8-year-old child who just experienced intensified pain from Rachel's failed attempt, declaring without reservation that fear wasn't part of her equation. That whatever happened next, Lily didn't blame Rachel for trying, didn't resent the failure, didn't want the attempt abandoned because it had gotten harder. Rachel's hand steadied. Not completely, the tremor still ran beneath the surface like current through wire, but enough. Enough to pick up the tweezers again, enough to meet Jake's eyes and nod once, enough to accept the weight of trying again when trying had already proven dangerous. Betty was already repositioning the light. Jake settled Lily back onto the booth bench, his large hands gentle on his daughter's small frame. Hank remained near the door, posture rigid with disapproval, but making no move to interfere now that Jake had made his decision clear. Rachel took 3 slow breaths, letting each one fill her lungs completely, holding for 4 counts, releasing for 6. The technique she'd learned for managing performance anxiety, for clearing the panic that could cause hands to shake and judgment to fail. Danny's face tried to surface again, but she pushed it down. This wasn't about her fear. This wasn't about her redemption. This was about a little girl who trusted her despite evidence that trust might be misplaced. She leaned in again, adjusting the phone's light to the angle that had revealed the mass initially. But now the object sat deeper, harder to see clearly, the shadows more pronounced. Rachel's nursing school training filtered through her mind, the delicate structure of the ear canal, the eardrum's vulnerability, the narrow margin between successful extraction and permanent damage. The tremor in her hands intensified as she inserted the tweezers again, following the canal's curve with agonizing slowness. Millimeter by millimeter, watching the rubber tips disappear into shadow, working entirely by feel past the point where vision failed. The foreign object sat beyond her direct line of sight, now pushed deeper by her earlier mistake. Rachel adjusted her angle, working more by instinct than observation. Letting her fingers read the resistance that meant contact, the texture that indicated foreign material versus natural tissue. The tweezers touched something solid, She tested the grip, carefully applying pressure, so gentle it barely registered, confirming she had purchased before attempting actual extraction. Lily's body tensed beneath Jake's hands, anticipating pain, but the little girl didn't move, didn't jerk away, didn't compromise the delicate positioning that this procedure required. 8 years old and demonstrating control that made Rachel's throat close with emotion she couldn't afford during active intervention. Rachel began to pull so slowly the movement was almost imperceptible. The object resisted years of compression, having created resistance that required patience rather than force. She maintained steady pressure, working with the body's natural structure rather than against it, letting the foreign material ease free incrementally instead of trying to extract it in one motion. Sweat ran down her temple. The diner's air conditioning felt inadequate against the heat of concentration and fear. Betty's breathing behind her provided rhythm in, for 3 counts out for 4, the unconscious cadence of someone maintaining calm through sheer will. The object began to move. Rachel could feel it sliding through the ear canal, bringing accumulated wax and debris with it, the resistance gradually decreasing as the mass worked free from where it had been lodged against delicate tissue. Centimeter by excruciating centimeter, emerging toward light and open air, and the possibility that this might actually work. Lily whimpered once, a soft sound of discomfort that made Jake's grip tighten reflexively. Rachel froze immediately, waiting, assessing whether the pain indicated damage or just the natural response to pressure in a sensitive area. The little girl's hand signed something quick, and Jake's rough voice translated, "Keep going, she's okay." Rachel continued, every nerve ending focused on the feedback, traveling through the tweezers into her fingers. The texture of the object suggested foam of some kind, compressed and hardened by years of wax accumulation. The shape felt circular, maybe 5 millimeters in diameter, small enough to fit through a toddler's exploring fingers, but large enough to completely block the narrow ear canal. And then, after what felt like hours but was actually 90 seconds of continuous extraction, the mass came free. Rachel held it up to the light. Betty provided her hand, shaking so badly the object trembled in the tweezer's grip. A foam earplug, the kind adults use for sleeping or noise reduction, completely encased in darkened wax that had accumulated over years. The original bright color had turned nearly black, compressed into something that looked more like a stone than synthetic material. Betty's breath came out in a rush. Jesus Christ, that thing was in her ear this whole time. Jake stared at the object with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read, horror, relief, fury, and something deeper that might have been grief for all the years his daughter had suffered, while this tiny piece of foam blocked her hearing and caused chronic pain. His voice came out rough. How did it even get in there? Rachel's clinical assessment came automatically, nursing school training, overriding emotional reaction. She probably found it when she was a baby, 6 to 8 months old. At that age, children explore everything by touch and mouth. If you kept earplugs somewhere accessible, she could have picked one up and inserted it before anyone noticed. Once it was in deep enough, it would have been difficult to see without the right angle of light. And as her ear canal grew, the object got pushed deeper and covered in wax that camouflaged it completely. Jake's face had gone pale, his weathered features showing every year of age and more. I used those. Back when Lily was a baby, I was working long shifts at the garage trying to build the business. I'd sleep with earplugs because the noise from the street kept waking me up. Kept them on the nightstand right where she could have reached them from her crib. The guilt in his voice was visceral, the realization that his daughter's 8 years of suffering had originated from his own carelessness, from a simple convenience he'd never thought to secure against a curious infant. Rachel recognized that particular brand of self-recrimination because she'd lived with it herself, understood how it could eat through your sense of competence and leave nothing but hollow certainty that you'd failed someone who depended on you. But there was no time to address Jake's spiral because Lily hadn't moved since the extraction. The little girl lay perfectly still on the booth bench, eyes open but fixed on nothing, her expression blank in a way that made Rachel's medical training scream warnings about shock or neurological complications. Jake noticed at the same moment his hands moving to his daughter's face. "Lily, baby, are you okay? Can you hear me?" The silence stretched, broken only by the diner's ambient noise, refrigerator hum, air conditioning cycling the distant sound of traffic beyond the closed blinds. Lily's eyes remained unfocused, her breathing shallow and rapid, small chest rising and falling, with a rhythm that suggested something beyond ordinary calm. Rachel leaned closer, checking pupil dilation, looking for signs of physical distress that would indicate immediate medical crisis. "Lily, if you can hear me, squeeze your dad's hand." No response. The little girl's fingers remained slack in Jake's grip. Hank had moved closer to the booth now, his earlier anger replaced by visible concern. Betty's hand had gone to her mouth, eyes wide with fear that whatever Rachel had done during extraction had caused damage. They couldn't see something internal and catastrophic. Then Lily's face began to change. The blank expression cracked, first confusion replacing shock, her eyes focusing and refocusing as if trying to locate something invisible. Her head turned slightly, tracking movement nobody else could perceive, her attention darting from the refrigerator to the door to the ceiling with increasing agitation. Jake's voice rose in pitch. "Rachel, what's happening to her?" But Rachel understood medical training, connecting symptoms to explanation with sudden clarity. She's processing sound. For the first time in 8 years, maybe the first time in her conscious memory, her left ear is transmitting auditory information to her brain. She's overwhelmed by sensory input she doesn't know how to interpret yet. Lily's hands flew to both ears, pressing against them, as if she could somehow control the flood of information suddenly pouring into previously silent receptors. Her mouth opened and a sound emerged, part gasp, part cry, entirely involuntary. And for the first time in her conscious life, Lily heard her own voice. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The little girl's eyes went impossibly wide, her expression cycling through shock, wonder, confusion, and something approaching fear at the alien experience of sound production in simultaneous perception. Her lips moved, testing, and she whispered one word that came out tentative and perfect and absolutely devastating. "Daddy." Jake made a sound somewhere between a shriek and a laugh, pulling his daughter into his arms, so fast Rachel barely had time to move out of the way. The big man cradled his child against his chest, his weathered face crumpling, as 8 years of desperate hope and resigned acceptance collided with the reality of his daughter speaking and hearing simultaneously for the first time. Lily was crying now, overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face as her brain struggled to process the explosion of auditory input. Every sound in the diner, the refrigerator's mechanical hum, the air conditioning's steady rush, Hank's sharp intake of breath, Betty's quiet weeping, the traffic noise filtering through walls, all of it hit the little girl's consciousness, without filter, without the gradual accumulation that built most people's understanding of their acoustic environment. Her voice came out louder than she probably intended, no internal calibration for volume. "I can hear. Daddy, I can hear you. I can hear me. I can hear everything." Jake's response got lost in the raw emotion overtaking his carefully controlled composure. He held Lily tighter, his shoulders shaking, years of accumulated fear and helplessness and desperate prayer, finding release through tears he'd probably never allowed himself in front of his daughter before. The president of the Steel Vipers, the man who had built a reputation on never showing weakness, broke apart completely in a diner booth while his daughter discovered sound. Betty had her hand pressed over her mouth, tears running freely down weathered cheeks. Hank stood frozen near the door, his earlier aggression completely abandoned, staring at the scene with an expression that suggested he was witnessing something beyond his capacity to process. Even through his suspicion and protective instinct, the reality of what had just occurred penetrated deeply enough to render him speechless. Rachel sat back on her heels, tweezers still clutched in trembling hands, the foam earplug held in rubber tips like evidence of something impossible made real. Her mind felt blank shock and relief and residual terror combining into numbness that prevented coherent thought. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. The observation had been correct, the intervention successful, despite the terrifying failure midway through, and Lily Thompson could hear. But the magnitude of what had just happened wouldn't fully register. Yet couldn't fully register while adrenaline still flooded her system, and Lily's overwhelmed crying filled the space with proof of restored hearing, and Jake's breakdown continued with intensity that suggested years of accumulated emotion finding sudden exit. The diner's front door opened again, admitting a woman Rachel had never seen before. Mid-50s professional attire, carrying herself with the particular confidence of someone accustomed to authority. She took in the scene with quick assessment, closed diner crying child, large man holding her waitress on the floor, with medical supplies scattered around her two other adults in various states of emotional distress. Her voice carried professional concern with underlying steel. I'm Dr. Patricia Simmons. I was having breakfast here when you closed. I've been waiting outside, but I heard crying and wanted to make sure everyone's okay. Jake's head snapped toward the newcomer, protective instinct overriding everything else. He shifted Lily behind him, slightly, one hand still wrapped around his daughter, while the other moved to a position that suggested readiness for confrontation. His voice came out rough from crying but carried unmistakable warning. We're fine, family business. Dr. Simmons' gaze moved across the scene again, professional assessment taking in details most people would miss. Her attention lingered on the medical supplies, the foam earplugs still clutched in Rachel's tweezers, Lily's tear-streaked face, and the way the little girl's hands kept moving to her ears with confused wonder. The doctor's expression shifted into something more complex. I'm an ENT specialist. I was 3 booths over when you closed the diner. I heard parts of the conversation, saw what just happened through the gap in the blinds. She paused, her voice taking on weight. And I need to tell you something, Mr. Thompson. I examined your daughter 3 years ago at Austin Medical Center. I was one of the 23 specialists who told you nothing could be done. The silence that followed was absolute. Jake's face transformed through several emotions too quickly to track, landing on something between fury and disbelief. Hank took a step forward, his earlier protective aggression returning full force. Even Betty's expression, hardened decades of diner diplomacy, abandoned in the face of this admission. Dr. Simmons held up both hands, a gesture of surrender and acknowledgement. I missed it. I looked in her ear canal with proper equipment, proper lighting, and I completely missed what this waitress spotted with a phone flashlight. And I need to understand how that happened, because if I missed this, I've likely missed others. The honesty in her voice carried weight that seemed to penetrate Jake's anger. He remained tense, but his posture shifted slightly, making space for explanation rather than immediate violence. Lily had stopped crying, overwhelmed tears giving way to the intense concentration of someone trying to process too much auditory information at once. Her small hands moved in sign language that Jake translated automatically. She wants you to look at her ear. She wants to make sure Rachel didn't hurt anything. Dr. Simmons approached slowly, every movement telegraphed and careful, making herself as non-threatening as possible, while crossing space that felt charged with barely controlled aggression. She knelt beside the booth where Rachel still sat, meeting the younger woman's eyes, with an expression that combined professional assessment and something approaching respect. Her voice stayed quiet, meant primarily for Rachel. May I see what you removed? Rachel handed over the tweezers without speaking, throat too tight for words, watching as the ENT specialist examined the foam earplug under better light from her phone. Dr. Simmons's face registered recognition and something darker. The realization of significant professional failure, the understanding that her examination 3 years ago had been inadequate in ways that extended someone's suffering unnecessarily. She looked back at Rachel. How did you identify it? What did you see that I missed? Rachel's nursing school training provided structure when emotion threatened coherence. I watched the pattern. Lily's pain always originated from her left ear, always the same head tilt 45 degrees clockwise. I suspected foreign body impaction, researched similar cases, found documentation about how accumulated wax can camouflage objects deep in the canal. Then I used the head tilt itself as guidance, examined her ear at the exact angle she naturally assumed during pain episodes. The light caught it differently from that position. Dr. Simmons absorbed this with visible discomfort, each word highlighting methodology that should have been standard practice, observation that should have been automatic. I examined her sitting upright in a standard position. I used an otoscope with appropriate magnification. I followed every protocol in the textbook. And I completely missed what you found because I wasn't thinking about patient behavior as diagnostic information. She turned to Jake, her professional composure showing cracks that revealed genuine remorse underneath. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to examine your daughter now to make sure the extraction didn't cause damage. Then I'm writing this up as a case study, submitting it to every medical journal that will publish it, and incorporating this observation methodology into my practice and teaching. This should never have happened. Your daughter shouldn't have suffered for 8 years because I failed to look at the right angle. Jake's response came after several seconds of visible internal debate. You examine her. You make sure Rachel didn't accidentally hurt her getting that thing out. Then we're taking Lily to the hospital for full evaluation, and you're going with us to explain to whoever's on duty exactly what happened and why this matters." Simmons nodded, once crisp and professional, then focused entirely on Lily. The examination took 10 minutes of careful, methodical assessment. She checked the ear canal for damage, examined the eardrum for perforation, tested Lily's hearing response with increasingly complex sounds, while the little girl's expression cycled between wonder and overwhelming confusion. When she finished, Dr. Simmons sat back with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal devastation. "The eardrum is intact, no perforation, no visible damage to the canal tissue. There's some redness from the extraction, which is normal, and some residual wax that will clear naturally. Her hearing in the left ear appears to be completely normal, though we'll need proper audiometry to confirm threshold levels." She looked at Rachel directly. "You did this perfectly. The technique was sound, the execution was careful, and you achieved a result that, frankly, I'm not certain I could have replicated given the depth and position of that object." The validation landed strangely praised from someone whose professional failure had extended Lily's suffering, but whose expertise now confirmed Rachel's success. Rachel nodded acknowledgement, but couldn't form words. Emotions still too close to the surface. The reality of what had just occurred too large to process while surrounded by people whose lives had just fundamentally changed. Jake stood gathering Lily into his arms with gentle efficiency. The little girl wrapped her arms around her father's neck, face pressed against his shoulder, small body still trembling from sensory overload. Her voice came out muffled but audible, testing this new ability to hear herself speak. "Everything is so loud, Daddy. Is it always this loud?" Jake's laugh came out wet and broken. "Yeah, baby, it's always this loud. You'll get used to it, I promise." Hank had moved to the door already on his phone, making arrangements that Rachel couldn't quite hear, but assumed involved hospital logistics and probably Steel Viper's backup. Betty was cleaning up the medical supplies with shaking hands, organizing chaos back into order, because that's what she did. That's how she managed crisis through practical action and familiar routine. Dr. Simmons collected her things, pulled out a business card, and handed it to Rachel. "I don't know your background, don't know if you have medical training or just exceptional observational skills, but you should be in healthcare. What you did today, the pattern recognition, the research, the courage to act on observation despite lacking credentials, that's what medicine should be. That's what I forgot somewhere between medical school and 3 years ago when I examined Lily and saw nothing worth investigating further." She turned back to Jake. "I'll meet you at Austin Medical Center. I'm calling ahead to arrange priority intake with the head of ENT. Your daughter is going to be a case study that changes how we examine pediatric hearing loss. That's not compensation for the years she suffered, but it might prevent other children from experiencing the same thing." Jake nodded once, still holding Lily close. He looked at Rachel, and his expression carried too many emotions to parse gratitude, lingering shock. Something approaching awe that a waitress had achieved what 23 specialists had failed to accomplish. His voice came out rough. "Rachel, I don't know how to thank you. I don't have words for what you just gave my daughter gave me. But I'm going to find a way to make this right, to make sure you understand what this means." Rachel finally found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Just love her. Just help her adjust to this. That's enough." But watching Jake carry Lily toward the door, seeing the little girl's face buried against her father's shoulder, while she processed a world suddenly full of sound, Rachel knew it wouldn't be enough. Not for Jake, not for the Steel Vipers, not for a community that took care of their own and repaid debts with interest that couldn't be measured in simple currency. The diner felt impossibly quiet after they left, though that was relative. The refrigerator still hummed, the air conditioning still cycled traffic, still filtered through walls. But the human noise had gone, taking with it the intensity that had filled the space for the past hour. Betty locked the door behind them, flipped the sign back to closed, and turned to Rachel with an expression that combined pride and concern in equal measure. "You did it. After 3 years of running from your own judgment, you trusted yourself, and you did it." Rachel's legs gave out suddenly controlled collapse that put her on the floor with her back against the counter. The adrenaline was draining now, leaving exhaustion and trembling hands in the delayed processing of what had just occurred. She'd performed a medical procedure without license or supervision, had extracted a foreign object from a child's ear canal, despite having no legal authority to do so, had risked everything on observation and instinct and desperate hope. And it had worked. Lily could hear. 8 years of silence and pain ended because Rachel had noticed patterns and refused to stay quiet despite every instinct screaming to protect herself from potential failure. Betty slid down beside her old knees, protesting but managing the descent, and wrapped one arm around Rachel's shoulders. They sat there in silence, real silence now, companionable and still, while Rachel's hands slowly stopped shaking and the magnitude of the morning settled into something approaching comprehension. The hospital confirmed everything Dr. Simmons had assessed. Lily's left ear showed completely normal hearing function once the audiologist ran comprehensive tests. The right ear remained profoundly deaf, confirming that the bilateral diagnosis had been partially correct. There was sensorineural hearing loss in one ear, cause still unknown, but the left ear's hearing loss had been purely mechanical obstruction, masquerading as permanent nerve damage. Jake listened to the findings with visible emotion he no longer tried to hide. The steel vipers present had cracked open in that diner booth and apparently decided not to seal the vulnerability back up. He signed everything to Lily, who sat on the examination table with wide eyes and overwhelmed expression, small hands periodically covering her ears when the auditory input became too intense. The speech therapist they consulted explained what came next: months of work, learning to modulate her voice, to understand auditory cues, to integrate sound into a worldview built entirely without it. Lily had learned to speak through sign language, and careful lip reading practice had developed clear enunciation, but she'd never heard herself or adjusted volume based on auditory feedback. The adjustment would be significant, challenging, occasionally frustrating. But Lily could hear. That fundamental reality overrode every complication. The story spread through Austin's motorcycle community with the speed that gossip and genuine news traveled when it was extraordinary enough to merit attention. Within 3 days, Jake received a call from another family, the Johnsons, who lived in South Austin, and whose 6-year-old son Tommy had been diagnosed with progressive hearing loss in his right ear. The symptoms matched localized pain, specific head tilt, deteriorating hearing that specialists attributed to unknown causes. Jake called Rachel at the diner, his voice carrying urgency that made her chest tight. "The Johnsons want you to examine their son. They heard what happened with Lily, and Tommy's symptoms sound identical. Can you meet us at their house tonight?" Rachel's first instinct was refusal. What she'd done with Lily had been desperation and luck combined, not repeatable medical practice. She wasn't qualified, wasn't trained, had no business examining other children based on one successful observation. But then she remembered Lily's face, remembered 8 years of unnecessary suffering, remembered the Johns Hopkins case study, and the certainty that foreign body impaction in pediatric patients was probably underdiagnosed because standard examinations missed what careful observation could reveal. She met the Johnsons that evening with Jake and Lily present. The little girl wearing sound-dampening headphones to manage auditory overload, but insisting on being there. Tommy was smaller than Lily, shy, and in obvious discomfort, his hand repeatedly touching his right ear in a gesture Rachel now recognized intimately. The examination took 15 minutes of careful observation, watching Tommy's natural movements, the way he tilted his head where he located his discomfort. Then Rachel used her phone's flashlight, adjusted to the angle Tommy's tilt suggested, and found it a small plastic bead, bright blue, lodged deep in his ear canal and covered in wax that had camouflaged it completely. This time, Rachel insisted on Dr. Simmons's presence for the extraction. The ENT specialist arrived within 30 minutes, examined Tommy herself, and confirmed Rachel's finding with visible distress that she'd missed another case during her regular practice. The extraction took place under Dr. Simmons' direct supervision. Rachel's hands steadier now, with one success behind her, and Tommy's hearing was restored in his right ear with the same dramatic immediacy that had transformed Lily's world. The Johnsons cried. Jake looked vindicated. Dr. Simmons took extensive notes and photographs for documentation, and Rachel understood that what had begun in Betty's diner had become something larger than one family's miracle. It was revealing a pattern of misdiagnoses that affected more children than anyone had realized. Steel Vipers called a meeting 3 weeks after Lily's extraction. Rachel received an invitation formal written on actual paper delivered to the diner by Hank, with an expression that had transformed from suspicious aggression to grudging respect. The meeting took place at their clubhouse on East 6th, a building Rachel had seen from the outside but never imagined entering. She walked in nervous, surrounded by leather and ink and men who'd built reputations on strength and loyalty and controlled violence when necessary. But the atmosphere wasn't threatening. It was reverent, almost ceremonial, as Jake called her to the front of the room where the entire club had gathered. His voice carried through the space with authority that demanded attention. Rachel Morgan saved my daughter when 23 doctors failed. She did it with observation and courage and willingness to risk everything on being right. The Steel Vipers pay our debts. Always. He handed her an envelope. Inside was documentation that her student loan debt, all $47,000, accumulated from 2 years of nursing school and compounding interest, had been paid in full. There was also a check for $10,000 designated for educational expenses when you're ready to go back. Rachel's hands shook holding the papers. This was more money than she'd ever seen, more financial freedom than she'd imagined having for decades. The student loans had been crushing weight monthly payments that consumed most of her waitressing income, constant reminder of education, abandoned, and dreams deferred. Jake wasn't finished. We're also starting a program, Second Listen Initiative, free secondary examinations for kids with unexplained hearing loss. You're going to train nurses and doctors on observation techniques. Dr. Simmons is medical director, but you're the one who figured this out. You're the one who saw what everyone else missed. Hank stepped forward, holding something wrapped in leather. He unfolded it to reveal a vest custom-made with the Steel Vipers colors and a patch that read, "Sharp Eyes, Open Heart." An honorary membership, a place in the family acknowledgement that Rachel belonged to something larger than herself now. She put on the vest with trembling hands, surrounded by bikers who'd decided she was worth protecting, worth celebrating, worth keeping close. The weight of it settled across her shoulders like armor and acceptance combined. But the most important moment came 2 days later, when Rachel finally found the courage to visit Danny. Her brother was 19 now, finishing his first year at UT Austin, studying environmental science. She'd avoided him since dropping out of nursing school, unable to face the reminder of her failure, unable to tolerate seeing him healthy when she remembered him dying from her mistake. They met at a coffee shop on campus, neutral territory that carried no history. Danny looked older than she remembered, lean and healthy and bearing no visible signs of having nearly died 3 years ago. He ordered a complicated espresso drink and led her to a corner table where afternoon light fell across scarred wood. His first words surprised her. "Mom told me what you did, about the little deaf girl and the thing in her ear. She said you actually trusted yourself for once." Rachel's throat closed. "Danny, I almost killed you. I told Mom not to take you to the hospital. I was so sure I was right." Danny's expression carried patience she didn't deserve. "You made a mistake because you were trying to help. Then you let that mistake define 3 years of your life, let it convince you that caring about people was dangerous." He leaned forward, voice intense with the kind of conviction only younger siblings could deliver. "But you finally remembered something I tried to tell you back then. The only thing more dangerous than making mistakes is refusing to try because you're afraid of making more." The conversation lasted 2 hours. They talked about the appendicitis, about the fear in the hospital and the recovery. They talked about Rachel's decision to drop out, about Danny's guilt that his emergency had derailed his sister's education. They talked about Betty's diner and Lily Thompson and what it meant to trust your observations when everything else screamed you were wrong. By the end, something had loosened in Rachel's chest, some knot of guilt and self-recrimination that had wound tight for 3 years, finally releasing into something closer to forgiveness. Danny gave her a hug that lasted long enough to matter, and his final words stayed with her as she walked back to her car. "Go finish what you started. You're good at this. Don't let fear take that away." Rachel enrolled in nursing school 3 weeks later, using the Steel Vipers' money to cover tuition. She kept her position at Betty's part-time now weekends only because the diner had become home in ways that transcended employment. But her primary focus shifted back to medical training, this time with maturity and perspective that 2 years of waitressing and one dramatic extraction had provided. The Second Listen initiative launched officially 6 months after Lily's restoration. Jake and the Steel Vipers funded it completely, creating a legitimate nonprofit with Dr. Simmons as medical director and Rachel as training coordinator once she finished nursing school. They partnered with clinics throughout Texas offering free comprehensive examinations for children whose hearing loss had been diagnosed as unexplained or permanent. The results were staggering. In the first 18 months, the program screened 800 children. 19 of them had foreign body impaction that had been missed by initial examinations. Beads, foam pieces, small toys, organic material that had lodged deep and been covered by wax until standard examinations revealed nothing obvious. 19 children whose hearing was restored because someone decided to look twice to observe behavior as diagnostic information to question whether unexplained actually meant we haven't looked at the right angle yet. Medical schools began requesting Rachel and Dr. Simmons for lectures. The case study they published together, Behavioral Observation as Diagnostic Tool Missed Foreign Body Impaction in Pediatric Hearing Loss, became required reading in ENT programs. The methodology spread beyond Texas, influencing examination protocols nationwide. But the most profound changes were personal, intimate, happening in the Thompson family and Betty's diner, and the space Rachel now occupied in both. Lily's adjustment to hearing took months of work. Speech therapy, 3 times weekly, practicing volume control and tonal variation, learning to process auditory information that most people absorbed unconsciously from birth. The little girl experienced setbacks, overwhelming noise that triggered anxiety, frustration when she couldn't make her voice do what she wanted, moments of wanting the familiar silence back because at least it had been predictable. Jake navigated it all with patience Rachel had never witnessed before. The Steel Vipers president learned about sensory processing, about gradual exposure therapy, about creating quiet spaces where his daughter could retreat when the world became too loud. He bought noise-canceling headphones, installed sound dampening in Lily's room, adjusted their entire life around helping his daughter integrate this new sense without drowning in it. And slowly, incrementally, Lily began to thrive. She discovered music first. Jake playing old country songs on the truck's radio during their Saturday drives, watching in the rearview mirror as his daughter's face transformed with wonder at organized sound that told stories. Lily became obsessed, asking to hear everything, building a catalog of songs that made her feel things she couldn't quite articulate yet. Then she started singing. Tentatively at first, voice uncertain and volume erratic, but with determination that reminded Rachel why she trusted this little girl's courage enough to try extraction a second time. Lily's natural ear for pitch surprised the speech therapist, who mentioned that some deaf children who gained hearing late showed unusual musical aptitude, possibly because they approached sound with analytical attention most hearing people never developed. By the time Lily turned 9, she was performing at local open mic nights. Jake watching from the front row with expression that suggested he was witnessing miracles on a weekly basis. Her voice carried something unique, clarity and control, built from years of speaking without hearing herself, combined with emotional depth that came from understanding silence as contrast to sound. Rachel attended every performance, sitting with Betty in the back, watching this child she'd helped transform into someone confident and vibrant and completely herself. The trust Lily had shown in that diner booth, asking Rachel to try again, despite pain and fear, had evolved into genuine friendship that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Lily called her Aunt Rachel now, introduced her to teachers and friends as the person who made me hear, saved seats for her at school concerts and birthday parties and Steel Vipers family events. The little girl had decided Rachel belonged to her, and Lily's claim came with protection and loyalty that the entire club enforced. Jake's gratitude manifested in quieter ways, making sure Rachel's car got serviced at cost by club mechanics, ensuring she never paid for meals at any establishment with Steel Vipers connections, checking in during her nursing school exams to offer encouragement. Their relationship remained friendly, respectful, bounded by appropriate distance given the circumstances and age gap, but deepened by shared experience of Lily's transformation. He showed up at Rachel's nursing school graduation 3 years later, Lily beside him in a dress that had probably required extensive negotiation, and both of them cheered loud enough to embarrass Rachel completely when her name was called. The diploma felt weightier with them in the audience validation that the decision to trust herself in that diner had led to reclaiming something she'd abandoned too easily. The job offers came from prestigious hospitals and specialty clinics, positions that would have meant significant salary increases and career advancement. Rachel turned them all down. Instead, she accepted a position at East Austin Community Clinic, serving low-income families who couldn't afford repeated specialist consultations, working specifically in pediatric care, with focus on thorough examinations that prioritized observation over expensive technology. Betty had asked her once during a late-night closing shift why she'd chosen the community clinic over more impressive opportunities. Rachel's answer came easily. I don't want to work where every patient can afford to be seen 23 times. I want to work where one thorough examination can change everything, where paying attention matters more than having money. Betty had nodded approval, understanding what motivated Rachel now. Not redemption for past mistakes, but commitment to making sure observation and careful attention became standard practice rather than exceptional occurrence. 5 years after Lily's extraction, the Thompson family and Steel Vipers gathered at Betty's diner for an anniversary celebration. The corner booth had a small plaque now installed by Jake without asking permission that read, "Where miracles require courage and careful attention." Lily was 13, thriving in 8th grade, member of her school's choir, and planning to audition for Performing Arts High School. Her hearing remained perfect in her left ear, the right ear still profoundly deaf, but managed with sophisticated hearing aid technology that gave her functional bilateral hearing for the first time in her conscious life. She'd written a song for the occasion, performed it standing on a chair in the middle of the diner, while Steel Vipers and regular customers and Betty's entire staff watched with varying degrees of emotional overwhelm. The lyrics told the story of silence and sound pain and healing trust and courage, everything condensed into 3 minutes of melody that Lily delivered with voice that had matured into something genuinely special. The final verse landed with power that made Rachel's throat close. Sometimes miracles don't need white coats, just someone brave enough to notice. The silence inside the noise, the pattern underneath the pain, someone willing to look twice when everyone else looked away. The room erupted into applause that was probably too loud for Lily's still sensitive processing, but the girl's smile suggested she didn't care. Jake was crying openly, no longer embarrassed by displays of emotion his daughter had taught him were strength rather than weakness. Hank was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to maintain tough guy composure and failing completely. Betty had baked a massive cake decorated with musical notes and a stethoscope because she'd never been subtle about symbolism. Rachel cut the first slice, handed it to Lily with something approaching ceremonial gravity, and watched this child she'd helped rediscover the world navigate social interactions with confidence that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. Later, after the crowd had thinned and only family remained, Jake pulled Rachel aside. His expression carried the weight of something he'd been preparing to say, something that required privacy and careful delivery. His voice stayed quiet, meant only for her ears. You know what the hardest part of all this was? Not the medical bills or the failed appointments, or even watching Lily suffer. It was accepting that I couldn't fix it myself, that all my strength and resources and determination meant nothing against something I couldn't identify or access. He paused, looking across the diner to where Lily was showing Betty photos on her phone, animated, and laughing in ways that had been impossible before sound gave her full access to social dynamics. Jake continued, "You taught me that sometimes the people who can help aren't the ones with the most credentials or the biggest reputations. Sometimes they're the ones paying attention when everyone else stopped looking. And trusting that letting go of needing to control everything myself, that was the hardest and most important thing I've learned." Rachel understood the gift implicit in his words, not just gratitude for Lily's healing, but acknowledgement that Rachel had given him permission to trust beyond his own capabilities, to accept help from unexpected sources, to recognize that strength sometimes meant knowing when to step back and let someone else try. She met his eyes directly. "You trusted me with your daughter when every logical reason said you shouldn't. That kind of courage matters just as much as whatever skill I brought to the observation. Maybe more." The moment stretched between them, weighted with 5 years of shared history, then Jake smiled, something genuine and unguarded that transformed his weathered face completely. "We make a good team, Steel Vipers and their honorary sharp-eyed waitress turned nurse." Rachel laughed, surprising herself with how easy it felt. "Former waitress, Betty still hasn't forgiven me for cutting back to weekends only." Betty's voice carried from across the diner, proving she'd been eavesdropping. "I'll forgive you when you convince more nurses to work in community clinics, instead of chasing prestigious hospital positions." Until then, you're on thin ice. The gathered family laughed the sound filling Betty's diner with the kind of warmth that made the space feel less like a business and more like the home it had become for everyone present. The Second Listen initiative expanded beyond Texas in its seventh-year satellite programs, launching in Arizona, New Mexico, and Louisiana. Rachel trained nurses and medical students across the Southwest, teaching observation techniques that seemed obvious once explained, but were revolutionary in their systematic application. The program had screened over 2,000 children by then, identifying 73 cases of missed foreign body impaction and restoring hearing in kids whose families had been told nothing more could be done. Each success story carried a version of Lily's journey, the years of suffering, the expensive consultations, the resignation to permanent loss, then the dramatic reversal when someone finally looked at the right angle with proper attention. Rachel attended as many of these moments as her schedule allowed, witnessing families experience the same overwhelming joy and relief that had filled Betty's diner that Saturday morning years ago. But she always returned to Austin to the community clinic and Betty's weekend shifts and Steel Vipers family events. The recognition and expansion were validating, but the core of what mattered remained local, intimate, grounded in the relationships that had formed around one little girl's restored hearing. Lily graduated from Performing Arts High School with multiple scholarship offers for music programs. She chose UT Austin, staying close to home, majoring in music therapy, with focus on working with deaf and hard of hearing children. The choice surprised no one who knew her story. Lily had found her purpose in the intersection of sound and silence, in helping others navigate the transition she'd experienced, in using her unique perspective to bridge communication gaps most people never understood existed. Rachel attended her first recital at UT, sitting between Jake and Danny in an auditorium that felt too large for the intimacy of what Lily's performance represented. The piece she'd chosen was complex, emotionally demanding, requiring vocal control that showcased years of work translating natural talent into technical skill. But what struck Rachel most was the confidence in Lily's presence, the way she commanded the space with authority built from understanding. She belonged there, that her voice deserved to be heard, that the silence she'd known for 8 years had given her insights about sound that made her interpretation unique and powerful. The final note hung in the air for 3 full seconds before applause erupted. Jake was crying again, had probably started crying before Lily even opened her mouth, and Rachel found her own vision blurred by tears that came from witnessing the full arc of transformation from 8-year-old girl in pain to 18-year-old woman owning her artistry without reservation. After the performance, standing outside the recital hall in Austin's warm spring evening, Lily hugged Rachel with strength that surprised her. The girl had grown tall, would probably match her father's height eventually, but the hug carried the same trust she'd shown at 8 years old when she'd asked Rachel to try extraction a second time. Lily's voice stayed quiet, meant just for Rachel. I'm going to work with deaf kids, help them understand that however they experience the world is valid, that hearing isn't better than silence, just different, and that sometimes miracles happen when someone pays attention to patterns everyone else ignores. Rachel pulled back enough to meet Lily's eyes, seeing the intelligence and compassion that had always been there but had deepened through experience of both silence and sound. You're going to be extraordinary at it. You already are. They returned to Betty's diner late that night, the usual post-performance celebration requiring familiar space and Betty's cooking in the community that had formed around one family's transformation. The corner booth had become almost sacred, still available for regular customers, but everyone in the neighborhood understood its significance, treated it with respect that bordered on reverence. Jake ordered his standard black coffee and wheat toast. Lily got the pancake special, tapping the menu twice in gesture that had become tradition, even though she could speak her order now. Rachel poured coffee with practiced ease, movements automatic from years of weekend shifts, comfortable in the rhythms of this space that had become home in ways that transcended employment. Betty emerged from the kitchen carrying a cake she had definitely not told anyone about, decorated with mortarboard and musical notes celebrating Lily's high school graduation and UT acceptance. The Steel Vipers members who'd crowded into the diner sang happy birthday with enthusiastic disregard for the actual occasion, because bikers didn't need proper context for celebration when family achieved milestones worth honoring. Rachel watched from behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, surrounded by the community that had formed around one observation, one decision to speak up, one little girl's courage to trust a stranger with her pain. The journey from that first Saturday morning to this moment had been neither simple nor straightforward, had required multiple attempts. Genuine fear, real risk, and willingness from everyone involved to trust beyond credentials and conventional wisdom. But standing in Betty's diner watching Lily laugh with her father, while surrounded by people who'd decided she belonged to all of them, Rachel understood what the past 7 years had built. Not just restored hearing for one child, or successful medical initiative, or her own completed nursing degree, but something more fundamental: proof that paying attention mattered, that patterns revealed truth, that courage came in forms that had nothing to do with formal authority. She caught Lily's eye across the diner, and the young woman raised her coffee cup in silent salute. One person who trusted her instincts, acknowledging another who'd done the same, both of them understanding that sometimes the most important medical intervention was simply refusing to accept unexplained as a final answer. Betty appeared at Rachel's elbow, her weathered hand squeezing Rachel's shoulder with affection that had accumulated over 10 years of shared space. "You did good, kid." Not just with Lily, though that's the headline, but with yourself. You stopped running from what you knew you could do. Rachel nodded, throat too tight for words, understanding that Betty had watched the entire journey from broken nursing student hiding behind a waitress apron to confident nurse who'd helped establish a program that was changing pediatric hearing loss diagnosis nationwide. The older woman had provided steady presence through all of it, had pushed when Rachel needed pushing, and supported when she needed stability. The party continued past closing time because when Steel Vipers celebrated, traditional business hours became suggestions rather than rules. Jake told stories about Lily's first year, with hearing the overwhelming noise and the gradual adjustment, and the moment she discovered how much she loved music. Hank contributed tales of the little girl's determination to sing at every club event, regardless of whether the audience was prepared for a 9-year-old's performance amid biker revelry. Dr. Simmons arrived late, still in scrubs from a long surgery, and added her own perspective. The medical case study that had become textbook material, the protocol changes that Second Listen initiative had inspired, the letters she received from ENT specialists who'd discovered their own missed cases after learning new observation techniques. And Lily herself told the story of that Saturday morning. From her perspective, the pain that had become normal, the waitress she'd watched, watching her, the moment of trust, when a stranger offered hope that 23 doctors had said was impossible. Her version included details Rachel had never known about how Lily had prayed every night for years that someone would figure out what was wrong, about how she'd started to believe maybe God looked like a tired waitress who paid too much attention to customers' patterns. The telling moved everyone to tears again because the story never got less powerful. No matter how many times it was repeated, never lost its capacity to remind everyone present that miracles existed in mundane observations, and that courage sometimes meant trusting people with unconventional qualifications. They locked up Betty's diner at 2 in the morning, the celebration finally winding down into satisfied exhaustion. Jake carried a sleeping Lily to his truck, the young woman who dominated a recital hall, now curled against her father's shoulder like the child she'd been 7 years ago. Some things didn't change, even when everything else transformed completely. Rachel drove home through empty Austin streets. Her weekend shift ended, her place in this family secured not through blood but through the choice to speak up, when staying silent would have been safer. The city felt different at this hour, quiet in ways that had nothing to do with silence, still in ways that suggested peace rather than absence. She thought about the Johns Hopkins article that had started everything still tucked in a drawer at home, the paper nearly disintegrated from handling. She thought about Danny's recovery and their reconciliation, about Betty's patience, and the Steel Vipers' loyalty, about Dr. Simmons's humility in acknowledging professional failure and working to prevent repetition. But mostly she thought about an 8-year-old girl who tilted her head at a 45-degree angle and trusted a waitress to understand what that gesture meant, who'd asked for a second attempt when the first one failed, who demonstrated more courage than Rachel had possessed until Lily's example showed her what bravery actually looked like. The observation had been correct. The pattern had revealed truth. The intervention had succeeded. And the ripples from that Saturday morning continued to spread outward, changing practices and restoring hearing and reminding medical professionals that sometimes the most sophisticated diagnostic tool was simply paying attention when everyone else had stopped looking. Rachel pulled into her apartment complex as dawn started lightening the eastern horizon. She had a shift at the community clinic in 6 hours, 3 pediatric patients scheduled, who deserved the kind of thorough attention she'd learned to provide, the observational care that made sure unexplained became a starting point for investigation rather than a final diagnosis. But first, sleep, and dreams probably filled with the sound of Lily Thompson's voice, clear and strong, and absolutely deserving of being heard. Mrs. Chen confronted Clara the next morning before she could leave for work, her elderly frame blocking the apartment building's entrance with surprising effectiveness. Her voice carried the particular authority of someone who had lived in the complex longer than anyone else and considered herself its moral guardian. "I saw that biker yesterday. Those people are dangerous. I'm going to tell Mr. Rodriguez." Clara tried to keep her voice level, professional, the tone she used with difficult customers. "He was just helping me with my car, Mrs. Chen. Nothing to worry about." The older woman's expression hardened. "Your father would be ashamed, associating with criminals and thugs. You dishonor his memory." The words landed like physical blows, each one finding the guilt Clara had been carrying for 5 years. She pushed past Mrs. Chen without responding, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall where anyone could see them. The bus ride to work took 45 minutes, eating into time she could have spent sleeping, and she arrived at Dusty's exhausted before her shift even started. Her phone buzzed as she was tying her apron. A text from an unknown number that she somehow knew was Axe before she even opened it. "Mechanic needs 2 days for parts. I can pick you up for work until car's ready. What time?" Clara stared at the message for a full minute, weighing options that all felt wrong in different ways. She could refuse and spend 3 hours daily on buses. She could accept and invite more judgment from neighbors and maybe lose her apartment. She could call her mother and beg for money she knew Rosa did not have. Her fingers typed before her brain could override them. 6 a.m., thank you. The response came immediately. Be there at 5:45. Axe pulled into her apartment complex at exactly 5:45 the next morning, the Harley's rumble cutting through pre-dawn quiet like an alarm clock for everyone within 3 blocks. Clara climbed on with hands that shook less than they had 2 days ago, wrapped her arms around his waist, and tried not to think about Mrs. Chen watching from her window, or Mr. Rodriguez preparing an eviction notice, or her father's ghost judging her choices. The ride to Dusty's took 8 minutes. Axe drove carefully, kept his speed reasonable, took turns with the same gentle precision he had shown before. When they arrived, he waited until she had dismounted safely before speaking. His voice carried concern that felt genuine. "You doing okay? You look tired." Clara's laugh came out bitter. "My neighbor thinks I'm a disgrace. My landlord will probably evict me. And I'm 3 hours short on sleep because buses don't run early enough. But yeah, I'm great." Axe's expression darkened in ways that reminded Clara he was capable of violence when provoked. "Your neighbor giving you trouble, I can talk to her." The immediate spike of terror must have shown on Clara's face because Axe held up both hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean talk, Clara. Just talk. Explain you're a good person helping my daughter, nothing threatening." Clara shook her head. "That would make it worse. She already thinks I'm associating with criminals. You showing up at her door would confirm everything she believes." Axe absorbed this silently, his jaw tight with frustration that had nowhere productive to go. Finally, he just nodded. "Call me when your shift ends. I'll pick you up." When the pattern repeated for 2 days, Axe arrived before dawn, drove Clara to work with care that felt almost protective, picked her up at shift's end. They talked during rides, conversations that started cautious and grew gradually easier. Clara learned he worked construction union electrician, honest labor that paid bills and provided health insurance for Lily. The MC was family and support system, not the criminal enterprise she had feared. They had done some questionable things when they were younger, Axe admitted, but having a disabled daughter changed priorities completely. His voice carried conviction when he explained, "Everything's different now. We do charity work, veteran support, fundraising for disabled kids programs. The illegal shit, the drug trafficking allegations, that was old guard. We cleaned house when I took over as president. Some members didn't like it and left. But the ones who stayed, they're good men trying to do right." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think people could change, that organizations could reform, that redemption was possible for those who genuinely tried. But her father's death whispered warnings she could not quite silence. Thursday evening, Axe delivered her car to Dusty's parking lot. New transmission installed, engine running, smooth interior, detailed to showroom condition, full tank of gas. He refused any discussion of payment beyond handing her a receipt marked paid in full and telling her the warranty covered 2 years or 50,000 miles. But he had brought Lily with him, the little girl secure in her sidecar, and the moment Lily saw Clara, her entire face lit up with joy that needed no words to convey. Clara found herself feeding Lily dinner, while Axe ate the routine already comfortable after just one previous encounter, the connection between them feeling almost familial in its ease. Viper arrived with the other brothers to meet up with Axe, all of them remembering Clara and greeting her warmly. The one called Smoke, who rarely spoke, actually smiled when he saw her with Lily. And the joker Rev could not resist commentary that made Axe's weathered face flush with embarrassment. Rev's grin was mischievous. Axe talks about you all the time. Clara, this Clara, that. It's actually kind of annoying. Axe's voice came out sharp. Shut up, Reva. But the teasing felt good-natured brotherly, the kind of ribbing that came from genuine affection rather than malice. Clara found herself smiling despite the awkwardness, despite knowing she should maintain distance, despite every warning her rational mind kept screaming. Chains leaned forward, his expression sincere beneath the beard. We're having a charity barbecue Saturday at the clubhouse. Raising money for disabled kids program. Would mean a lot if you came. Lily would love it. The invitation hung in the air, weighted with implications Clara could not quite sort through. Going to an MC clubhouse felt like crossing a line from which there would be no return. But refusing felt like rejecting this found family that had shown her nothing but kindness. Her voice came out hesitant. I'll think about it. That weekend, Clara helped her Aunt Teresa with Sophie's care at the house in Santa Fe. Bathing, feeding, physical therapy exercises that Sophie endured with patience and humor that Clara found inspiring. Teresa watched Clara with knowing eyes while they worked together to transfer Sophie from wheelchair to bed. Teresa's voice carried maternal concern. Mija, be careful with those bikers. I know you see good in them, but these men live dangerous lives. Clara tried to explain about Lily, about Axe's devotion, about the charity work and the reformed organization. But Sophie overheard from where she lay on the bed, her body rigid but her mind sharp, and she signed with hands that moved slowly but deliberately. Teresa translated for Clara, even though Clara understood basic ASL. She's asking if they're nice to the disabled girl. Clara signed back. Very nice. They love her so much. Sophie's response was simple, but carried wisdom that cut through adult prejudice with childlike clarity. Then they're good people. Clara drove back to Albuquerque thinking about judgment and redemption, about who deserved second chances and who got to decide. She had almost convinced herself to accept the barbecue invitation when her world exploded in the early hours of Wednesday morning. The smoke alarm woke her at 2:17. Clara's first confused thought was that she had left something on the stove, but she had not cooked dinner, had just eaten cold cereal before falling into exhausted sleep. Then she smelled it. Not burnt food, but something chemical accelerant, the kind of smell that meant intentional fire rather than accident. She grabbed her phone and ran for the door, smoke already thick in the hallway. Other residents were emerging from apartments, confusion turning to panic as flames became visible at the building's far end. Clara made it outside in pajamas, and bare feet stood shivering in the parking lot while sirens wailed in the distance, and her entire life burned behind cinder block walls that were supposed to have been fireproof. The fire department arrived within 10 minutes, 3 trucks and 15 firefighters attacking flames that had already consumed half the building. Clara watched numbly as everything she owned turned to smoke and ash. Her clothes, her books, her father's watch that she kept in a drawer because wearing it hurt too much, but she could not bear to part with it. 5 years of careful saving and cautious living, gone. The fire marshal arrived as dawn broke, examining the scene with professional detachment that Clara envied. He found her among the Red Cross volunteers distributing blankets and coffee, his expression grim. His voice carried certainty when he spoke. This was arson. Accelerant poured in multiple locations. Ignition point appears to be your apartment specifically. You have any enemies? Anyone want to hurt you? Clara's mind went blank. She had no enemies. She was a waitress who kept to herself, who worked double shifts and saved money and bothered no one. Who could possibly want to hurt her? But even as she thought it, Mrs. Chen's words echoed through her memory. Those people are dangerous. And the fire marshal's next question confirmed her growing horror. You've been seen with anyone unusual lately? Gang members, criminals, people who might have enemies of their own? Clara's hands started shaking so badly she dropped her coffee cup, hot liquid splashing across pavement. The fire marshal took her silence as answer and pressed harder. Ms. Martinez, if you're in danger, we need to know. If someone targeted you because of an association, that information could help us catch who did this. She gave him Axe's name and number with a voice that did not sound like her own. Told him about the bikers who came to the diner, about helping with the disabled girl, about accepting a ride in a car repair. Made it sound innocent because it was innocent, but watched the marshal's face close off with judgment she recognized from Mrs. Chen and could not fight anymore. He left her with a card and instructions to call if she remembered anything else. Clara sat on the curb wrapped in a Red Cross blanket, watching smoke still rising from her building, and knew with absolute certainty that this was her fault. Not that she had started the fire, but that somehow her association with the Iron Kings had painted a target on her back. At 4 in the morning, with nowhere to go and no family within driving distance, and minimal savings that would not cover first month, last month, and deposit on a new apartment, Clara made a call she knew she should not make. Axe answered on the first ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Clara, she tried to speak, but only a sob came out, all the terror and exhaustion and loss hitting her at once. Axe's voice sharpened with concern that felt almost paternal. Where are you? What happened? Clara managed to get the words out between sobs. My apartment burned down. They said it was arson. They said someone targeted my apartment specifically. The silence on the other end lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in that time Clara heard something shift. When Axe spoke again, his voice carried rage barely contained beneath concern. Where are you right now? I'm coming. She gave him the address. He arrived 20 minutes later with Viper in chains, all 3 men looking dangerous in ways that would have terrified her a month ago, but now just felt protective. Axe pulled her into a hug without asking permission, his massive frame surrounding her with warmth and safety, while she cried into his leather vest. His voice rumbled against her ear. You're okay. That's what matters. Everything else we can fix. But then he spoke to the fire marshal, used connections Clara had not known he possessed, and returned with information that made his expression go dark in ways that reminded her he was capable of violence. Axe's voice was tight when he finally spoke to her. Clara, I need to tell you something. This might be my fault. He explained about Desert Reapers, a rival MC that dealt drugs and ran guns, and did everything the Iron Kings had stopped doing years ago. The Reapers had been watching the Kings, looking for weaknesses, trying to find pressure points they could exploit. They had seen Axe with Clara, had followed him to her apartment, had decided to send a message. Clara felt the world tilt sideways. You're saying it almost died because of you, because I helped you. The guilt on Axe's face was so profound it hurt to witness. I'm saying I should have warned you, should have protected you better, should have known they'd see you as a target. Viper stepped in his scarred face, showing frustration. Axe, we don't know for sure it was Reapers. But Axe was certain. Who else? Timing's too perfect. They're escalating, going after civilians now, trying to draw us into war. Clara's terror crystallized into something sharp and focused. They'll come after me again. They know where I work. They know what I look like. Axe's response was immediate. Not if you're under our protection. Move into the clubhouse temporarily. We'll keep you safe until police catch whoever did this. Every instinct Clara possessed screamed that this was wrong. Moving into an MC clubhouse crossed every line, destroyed whatever remained of her reputation, made her complicit in a world she had sworn to avoid. But she had nowhere else to go. Red Cross could provide a hotel for 3 days maximum. After that, she would be homeless with no money for deposits and no references since her previous landlord's building had burned down. Her voice came out small when she answered. Just until I can find a new apartment. Just until police catch whoever did this. Axe's relief was visible. As long as you need your family. The Iron King's compound sat on 10 acres outside Albuquerque proper main clubhouse, surrounded by several smaller residences in a layout that suggested both community and security. Clara had expected something dirty, chaotic, dangerous. Instead, she found landscaping and cleanliness and children playing in a yard while women hung laundry and talked. Maria Chaines's wife welcomed Clara with warmth that felt genuine. She was maybe 40 nurse scrubs visible beneath her sweater-kind eyes that had seen hard things and retained compassion anyway. Her voice carried sincerity. Any friend of Lily's is friend of ours. That girl has changed Axe completely, made him better. But other women were more cautious, their eyes assessing Clara with suspicion she understood. Keisha Viper's girlfriend was particularly direct. She was maybe late 20s, beautiful in a hard way, that suggested she had survived things that would have broken softer people. Keisha's voice held warning. Another girl trying to trap a biker Axe is a good man. He's been through enough. Don't hurt him. Clara wanted to protest that she was not trying to trap anyone, that she was just scared and homeless and desperate. But Keisha's suspicion was reasonable. From the outside, Clara's situation looked exactly like manipulation. Homeless woman moves into MC President's compound, gains access to resources and protection, maybe tries to become permanent fixture through pregnancy or manufactured drama. Axe gave Clara a small guest house separate from the main residences. One-bedroom bathroom kitchenette, clean and comfortable, in ways that suggested it was used for visiting family rather than club business. Lily's room was in the main house next door, close enough that Clara could hear if the little girl needed help. Days turned into a week, then two. Clara helped with Lily daily, giving Axe breaks he desperately needed, learning more about cerebral palsy care than she had known was possible. Medications for seizure prevention, physical therapy exercises to maintain range of motion, communication techniques that went beyond words to genuine understanding. She discovered she was good at this natural in ways that made Maria comment more than once that Clara had found her calling. But the longer she stayed, the more complicated everything became. She learned the rhythms of clubhouse life. Morning meetings where business was discussed behind closed doors. Evening meals where families gathered and children played while adults talked. Weekend projects where everyone contributed labor to maintain the compound. It felt less like a criminal organization and more like a small town complete with gossip and drama and genuine care for neighbors. Clara's mother, Rosa, called on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with anger that had clearly been building. Teresa told me you're living with a motorcycle gang. Tell me she's wrong. Clara tried to explain about the fire, about having nowhere else to go, about Axe and Lily, and how they were helping her. But Rosa's fury was absolute. Her voice shook. Your father died because of men like them. Gangs, violence, drugs, all of it. How dare you dishonor his memory by joining them? Clara's response came out sharper than intended. I'm not joining them, Mom. I'm accepting help when I need it. There's a difference, obedience. Rosa's ultimatum was clear. If you don't leave immediately, don't bother coming back to Texas. You're no daughter of mine. The call ended before Clara could respond. She sat in her small guest house staring at the phone while tears streamed down her face and the last connection to her blood family severed over choices she had made in desperation. Axe found her an hour later, her crying audible through thin walls. He sat beside her without speaking, his presence solid and comforting in ways that should have felt inappropriate but just felt necessary. His voice was gentle when he finally spoke. Heard you on the phone with your mom. I'm sorry. Clara's voice came out broken. She disowned me. Because of you. Because I stayed here. The guilt on Axe's face was so profound, Clara immediately regretted her words. His voice carried pain when he responded. I'll help you find an apartment tomorrow. First, last deposit, whatever you need. I won't let you sacrifice your family for mine. But Clara realized as he said it that her blood family had already abandoned her. Rosa had moved to Texas and stopped calling except to judge. Her extended family had drifted away after Marco's death, uncomfortable with grief they could not fix. She had been alone for 5 years, isolated by trauma and poverty, and dreams that never materialized. The Iron Kings had fed her, housed her, protected her, treated her like she mattered. They were not perfect. They had criminal pasts and questionable connections and capacity for violence. But they had also shown up when no one else had. Her voice steadied as she spoke. I don't want to leave yet. Not until the police catch whoever burned down my building. Not until I know I'm safe. Something in Axe's expression shifted, relief mixed with emotion Clara could not quite identify. Okay, stay as long as you need. They sat in comfortable silence while dusk turned to full dark outside. Finally, Axe stood, moving toward the door before pausing at the threshold. His voice carried vulnerability she had rarely heard from him. Clara, I need you to know something. You being here helping with Lily, it's not just convenient. You've become important to us, to me towing. The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to explore. Clara's response was careful. You've become important to me too. You and Lily both. Axe nodded once and left before either of them could say more. Clara lay awake for hours thinking about lines being crossed and families being chosen, and whether accepting love from dangerous people made her dangerous too. 3 weeks after Clara moved into the clubhouse, an expensive car pulled up to the compound's entrance. Sleek knew the kind of vehicle that announced wealth and status in ways that felt out of place among the Harleys and pickup trucks. A blonde woman emerged dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Clara made in a month, her face professionally made up and her posture radiating confidence. Axe was outside working on his motorcycle when the woman arrived. Clara watched from her guest house window as recognition and rage transformed his face into something almost frightening. He stood his massive frame going rigid with tension and walked toward the woman with steps that looked like he was fighting the urge to run. Clara could not hear what they said, but body language told the story. The woman was Denise, had to be based on Axe's reaction. Lily's mother, who had abandoned her daughter 8 months ago and disappeared without contact. And she had a lawyer with her, a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase that suggested this was not a social call. Axe's voice carried across the compound, loud enough for everyone to hear. You left her for 8 months. You don't get to come back now. Denise's response was too quiet to hear, but her lawyer produced papers and handed them to Axe with professional efficiency. Clara watched Axe read them, his face going pale, then flushing with color that suggested blood pressure spiking toward dangerous levels. He looked up at Denise with betrayal so raw it hurt to witness from 50 feet away. You're filing for custody after what you did. The lawyer's voice was loud enough to carry. My client had postpartum depression, a medical condition that impaired her judgment. She sought treatment and is now healthy. She has every right to reunite with her daughter. Clara's legal knowledge was minimal, but even she understood the implications. Custody battles favored mothers, especially mothers with no criminal record facing fathers who had served 8 years for violent felonies. Denise lived in a nice apartment, had a stable job in pharmaceutical sales, could provide material comfort. Axe lived at an MC clubhouse, worked construction, had prison time and parole restrictions. The lawyer continued with professional detachment. Mr. Thornton, my client, is willing to negotiate reasonable visitation, but Lily deserves to be raised in a stable, safe environment, not a motorcycle club compound. Denise's voice finally rose loud enough to hear. I made a mistake. I was sick, but I'm better now and I want my daughter back. Axe's response was almost a roar. You can't take her. She's my whole world. You can't just take her. But the lawyer was already walking back to the car, Denise following with her head high. They drove away, leaving Axe standing alone holding papers that threatened to destroy everything he had built. Clara found him 10 minutes later, sitting on the ground beside his motorcycle, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs he was trying to contain. She sat beside him without speaking, her hand finding his massive one and holding tight. His voice came out broken when he finally spoke. I can't lose her, Clara. I won't survive losing her. Viper appeared with Chains and Gunner, all three men looking grim. Viper had been on his phone calling in favors and gathering information with the efficiency of someone who knew how to work systems most people did not understand. His voice was tight with anger when he reported findings. I looked into Denise. She's not back for Lily. She's back for money. He explained about disability benefits. Lily qualified for SSI payments, medical coverage support services that totaled nearly $3,000 monthly. Denise had burned through her savings over 8 months of partying and shopping, had a boyfriend who left when the money ran out, was facing eviction from her expensive apartment. Viper's conclusion was brutal. She sees Lily as an income stream. She'll get custody, put Lily in a state facility, collect the checks, and never visit. It's a con, and any family court judge will see right through it. But Chains, older and more cynical, shook his head. Judges see what they want to see. Mother with no record versus MC president with violent felony. They'll give Lily to Denise without thinking twice. Clara listened to them strategize and realized she could help. Character witness testimony, expert, opinion on caregiving, quality neutral, third party with medical background. Her testimony could make the difference. But if she testified for an MC president in family court, her nursing school application would be compromised. Background checks would flag her association. References from the dean would mention her involvement with a motorcycle club. Hospitals would question her judgment. Her entire future could be jeopardized. Axe must have seen the calculation in her eyes because he shook his head. No, you've already sacrificed too much. I won't let you destroy your future for us. But Clara thought about Lily's bright eyes and Axe's exhausted devotion and Sophie's signed wisdom. Then they're good people. She thought about her father's lessons about courage and compassion. She thought about what kind of nurse she wanted to be, what kind of person she wanted to become. Her voice was steady when she answered. You're my family now. Family doesn't abandon family. I'll testify. The scholarship letter arrived 3 days later, forwarded from Dusty's, where Clara still received mail. Acceptance to University of New Mexico nursing program. Congratulations on her admission tuition information enclosed. She opened it with hands that shook, knowing the amount would be high, but hoping it had not increased too much. $47,000 for first year, up from $45,000 when she had applied 6 months ago. Books and supplies, another $3,000. Living expenses if she did not work full-time, which would be impossible during the intensive program. $50,000 total bare minimum. Financial aid offered $12,000 in loans and grants. Still needed $38,000 just to start. Clara stared at the numbers and felt her dreams crumbling. Even if she saved every penny from now until fall, even if she worked triple shifts and lived on nothing, she would come up short. The nursing career she had spent 5 years working toward was slipping away because of math that would not cooperate no matter how hard she tried. Axe found her sitting outside her guest house that evening, the letter crumpled in her hands. Her face wet with tears she had stopped trying to hide. He sat beside her, his presence solid and comforting, and waited for her to speak. Her voice came out defeated. I got into nursing school. Can't afford it. Axe read the letter she handed him, his weathered face showing understanding. When he spoke, his voice carried certainty that left no room for argument. Let me pay for it. Full tuition all 4 years. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for Lily and me. Clara's response was immediate. I can't let you do that. It's too much. But Axe's voice grew firmer. You're helping me keep my daughter. You're testifying in court, risking your career, putting everything on the line. Paying for nursing school is nothing compared to what you're giving me. Clara wanted to accept, wanted to let him solve her problems with money she knew he somehow had, despite working construction. But taking $50,000 from a man she was testifying for looked like bribery, compromised her integrity, made her testimony tainted. They argued for an hour before reaching compromise. Loan not gift, legal contract, proper interest rate payment plan, starting after graduation. Everything documented and above board, so it looked like business rather than charity. Clara accepted reluctantly, knowing she had no other option, but hating the debt and the obligation and the way it tied her to this dangerous man who was somehow becoming the most important person in her life. Viper found Clara 2 days before the custody hearing, his scarred face showing discomfort with what he was about to reveal. They sat in her guest house while he explained where Axe's money came from and why she deserved to know before testifying. His voice was careful. Axe works construction, but that barely covers Lily's medical bills. To afford her equipment, her care, and now your tuition, he took a loan from the MC. $50,000 at low interest payment plan over 10 years. Clara nodded, not seeing the problem yet. Viper continued with obvious reluctance. The MC's money comes from the garage business now. Legitimate motorcycle repair shop, fully licensed, profitable. But years ago, before Axe went to prison, some of that seed money came from illegal activity. Drug distribution profits that got laundered into the garage. He met Clara's eyes. It's clean now, the business is legal, the money is documented, everything above board. But it's built on a dirty foundation. You deserve to know before you tie yourself to it. Clara felt the world shift slightly. Could she accept money with criminal origins? Could she testify for a man whose organization had profited from drugs that destroyed lives and communities? What if the nursing board found out? What if hospitals refused to hire her? She thought about her father, who had worked at a restaurant that probably hired undocumented workers, who had bought a car from a dealership that had been sued for fraud, who had lived in a world where nobody's money was completely clean. She thought about pragmatism versus purity, survival versus principle. Her voice was steady when she answered. The money is legal now. Axe is reformed now. People deserve second chances. I'm taking the loan. Viper's relief was visible. You're good for him, Clara. He's better since you showed up. The custody hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Fernando Maria's cousin, who specialized in family law, prepped Clara on what to expect. Denise's lawyer would attack her credibility, question her relationship with Axe, suggest bias or inappropriate involvement. His voice was clinical. They'll say you're sleeping with him. They'll question your judgment. They'll make you look like a gold digger or a troubled woman with poor boundaries. You need to stay calm, stick to facts, don't get emotional. Clara nodded, taking notes, preparing herself for character assassination. But underneath the preparation, terror was building. What if her testimony made things worse? What if the judge saw her MC association as proof that Axe provided unstable environment? What if she destroyed his chances instead of helping the night before court? Clara could not sleep. She sat outside her guest house under New Mexico stars while anxiety sang through her nervous system. Axe found her there past midnight, his own sleeplessness evident in the shadows under his eyes. He sat beside her without speaking for a long moment. Finally, his voice broke the silence. You don't have to do this. I'll find another way. I can't let you sacrifice everything. Clara turned to face him, this dangerous man who had somehow become her family. There is no other way, and I want to do this. Her voice grew stronger. I care about you, Axe. I care about Lily. You're the family I chose, and that means fighting for you even when it's hard. Axe's expression held emotion too complex to name. After this is over, after the hearing, I want to take you on a real date. No debt, no obligation, no crisis. Just you and me getting to know each other without chaos. Clara smiled despite her fear. I'd like that. They sat in comfortable silence under stars that had witnessed human drama for millennia and would continue long after their particular story ended. Almost kissed, but did not, saving it for after the hearing, for a moment untainted by desperation and fear. Tomorrow they would face family court and a system stacked against them. Tomorrow Clara would testify and risk everything she had worked for. Tomorrow would determine whether love and loyalty and chosen family could triumph over biology and prejudice and the weight of criminal pasts. But tonight they sat together under vast New Mexico sky, two people who had found each other in impossible circumstances and drew strength from connection that felt like the only real thing in a world built on shifting sand and uncertain futures.